And we are live. Sorry, people. We had to work on a couple things, right?
A
So
little
like
slight pivot. A little
little,
slight pivot.
little slight pivot, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you for being here. What's up, Cam? How's your day going, man?
Man, everything is good. I had a pretty chill day today, to be honest with you. Other than helping prep for the live, I mean, it was pretty chill.
Yeah.
Uh, Wifey, we've been getting some garden stuff squared away. She's been doing most of the separating of all of our starts today.
Oh, you gave her the
So
hard job. Don't let them do you like that.
nah, man, she's got the nice hands for it. I
They
mean,
do
she's
got the
good.
nice.
She's good at separating those, man. I'll be ripping them all apart, and hey, as you separate them, one of them got all the roots over here on the left, and the other one has no root zone. So, nah. Once everything gets outside and the management of them at that point, that's when I get down.
Yeah, yeah,
How
yeah.
about you? How things going your way?
Hey, well, we got two kids under the age of two. So we have days. Today was one of those days.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
we're making it. Nothing to complain about. The garden, you already know the garden is popping. The
yeah.
yard already looks good too, so no complaints on that. But thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate it. We have a very special guest for you tonight, and there's a theme running for tonight. We want to help you save as much money as possible. That's the point of this. We don't want you to waste money on products, do we, Cam?
No, not at all. I mean, and that's one of the things. I've heard this a lot. I've heard people saying it. I've seen comments. Hey, I'm trying to save money this year. I'm trying to cut back on my lawn care program. And I understand it. I understand it. Like things. Inflation is real. Other things in life is getting more expensive, and a lot of times, man, the lawn is not really the priority to go spending extra money on. So,
Yeah.
hey, we're here to provide you some information, and we're gonna bring the data. We got a
Mm,
guy that's definitely gonna bring the data.
we
Y'all know I'm
got
about the data driven
we
decisions.
got them receipts.
We got the receipts, so
Yeah.
we're gonna bring. We've got demand that's gonna bring the data for us to help make those better decisions.
Yeah, that man is no other than Mr. Doctor Travis Shaddox. Welcome on stage with us. Thank you for being
Thank you.
here. Thank you for being
You can
here.
just call me Travis Shaddox. It doesn't
I
bother me
don't
if
know. I
you.
kind of feel I feel like I want to call you Doc tonight. Yeah, that might be the running thing. Would that make you uncomfortable if I just called you Doc?
Whatever you're comfortable saying, I'm
Okay.
comfortable
All
hearing.
right. I'll throw it to the chat. Chat, what should we call him? Should we call him Travis or should we call him Doc tonight? Let me know what you're thinking out there. But without anyone who doesn't know you or they're not familiar with you, could you take a moment, please, and just give the audience a little background on yourself, what you're about, and where your subject matter
Okay, sure.
expertise?
Okay, yeah. So I'm Travis Shaddox. I'm originally from Oklahoma. I was born and raised in Oklahoma, and I moved to Florida to do graduate work. So I did my master's and Ph.D. at the University of Florida. I got my bachelor's degree at Oklahoma State, and I lived and worked in Florida for almost 20 years. I uh, started off working with sports turf in Miami, actually out of college, where I managed, I don't know, 10 or 15, 20 sports fields down in Weston and Miami Lakes.
Nice.
Anyway, um, I did that for a while, and and then I ended up moving, and my girlfriend became my fiance, and moved, and da 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 da. Anyway, um, I ended up working in the fertilizer business for about 6 or 7 years in Central Florida. So I did that for a while, and after that, I ended up going back into academia as a professor at the University of Florida, assistant professor at the University of Florida. So I was an assistant professor there in turfgrass, soils and turfgrass at the University of Florida, and my like most very oblivious but extremely lucky men, I married someone who's extremely intelligent, much more than I am. So I married way out of my league. And there was a decision made in her career to take things in a different direction. So I ended up moving and leaving the University of Florida and came to the University of Kentucky. So I was a professor here for 3 years. And since then, the Kentucky program shut down, and I'm mostly retired now. I do some side work here and there. And just some things that interest me or whatever. But my area of specialty is soils. So I deal in soil fertility and turf nutrition, with granular and foliar nutrients being a key part of my research. Working in soil testing and correlations and calibrations and validating and adjusting critical levels and all those sorts of things that you might go along with nutrient recommendations. So my background's heavily in warm season soils or warm season turf grasses, lots with Bermuda and St. Augustine grass. And then I have some experience in cool season grasses, primarily tall fescue. But so that's a little bit about what I do, who I am. Yeah.
That's a heck of
So
a
can I ask you guys a question? So Robert, before we go too far down the rabbit hole of data and turf and get all into the goody parts that people want to hear,
Get your pencils out, people. Get your pencils and your paper. Prepared to take
what I want to know is
your handy dandy notebooks.
where did the name turf therapy come from, and why was that chosen?
Aha, look at that. That's a great question. Because it's a twofold question. I'm gonna give you the background on me and why I have that name. So I am an active duty service member. I have been serving in the military and the Army for 17 years and 1 month. I'm a master sergeant, and I'm an EOD tech, explosive ordnance disposal technician. Take apart bombs. We don't want things to blow up, even though people, they hear us and they're like, "Oh, you're blowing stuff up." Well, that's actually not my job. My job is to make it not blow up. But anyway,
okay.
Had a rough deployment. And I came back and everything was fine for a while, and then it wasn't fine. And then one day I was in my backyard fixing a hole that my dogs kept like eating around in and like playing in, getting in the mud. It's like, I'm gonna fix this hole. And while I was out there that weekend, I probably got some of the best rest I'd gotten in a long time, and just things kind of just mellowed out. It turned out to be very therapeutic. Back then, I was on a regular regimen of medication and speaking with my psychiatrist. Within a year's time, no longer medicated and barely going to see my psychiatrist. My therapy was being out in the yard, which eventually blossomed into gardening as well. And I've always had an affinity for teaching, for learning and then teaching what I learned, even though I'm not the best teacher, but I try my best. And I love music, and I've grown to love videography pretty well. I'm not going to say I'm a cinematographer at all. I won't claim that, but I enjoy making things look nice and telling a story, whether it be through music or visual aid or both of them combined. So that's how I landed on the name Turf Therapy. It was actually my mom who helped me come up with it. So
nice. Yeah. Okay. I even like the name, the slogan below it, which is
healing your lawn and soul. I used to say that at the end of every video. Now I just say peace because I used to get tripped up. And I mean, in itself, it means the same thing.
So before we go any further, one, thank you for what you do. What you do allows goofballs like me to sit around and research and clown around in the soil. Because we oftentimes lose sight of, priorities and we can, we here in the United States can play games on the computer all day long because of people like you. So thank you for that. Yeah. And so if I understand you correctly, so you basically deployed, you had however many deployments, you've been in it for almost 2 decades. And at some point between when you started and where you're at now, you had some issues with I'm assuming related to stress and mental health issues that you were trying to figure out how to address.
Absolutely.
And you did it through medication. You did it through the right ways of seeing a mental health counselor or a psychiatrist.
Yep.
But it was through that. But in addition to that, you found yourself working with plants and soils and found that as a release and therapeutic, and that's how the name came up. So
absolutely.
First of all, and so second, so you're like a superhero. You're gonna be my new hero for this year because one, I mean, you have no idea the level of admiration I have for people that do what you do. I wish more Americans really took to heart what you do, and literally just hundreds of thousands of people play online games and have no idea what real heroes do. So that's what you do. But two, to speak openly about your mental health conditions and issues or whatever is, I feel, extremely important. and so important to the fact that I'll share a little bit with me is that I'm in therapy twice a week. I've been in therapy twice a week for a long time, for nothing more than just maintaining my mental health. And what I like to tell people is there's, for some reason, a taboo about mental health.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why, but it's this to me. It's the same as all these people who go to the gym and work on their physical health. They work on their beauty, and that's fine. No problem. Vanity is great. If you want to do that, great. You're staying physically fit, mentally or physically healthy, great. Going to a mental health counselor is the same thing. It's just exercising your mind and working on your mind, just like other people go work on their body and keep their body healthy. To keep our mind healthy, I would take the position as is as equally important as keeping your body healthy. So thank you for sharing that and being open about that, because I think the more we talk about it, the more normal it becomes, and the more people who will go and seek help when they need help and work on their mental health. So thank you for that too.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
So having said all that, I just wanted to say hello, and I didn't really know where that name came from. I thought it was a very interesting name. So
yeah.
And so if we can shift gears a little bit with Cam, you said you're in Maryland. So what exactly do you do, Cam, for a career? What is your career?
So I am a engineer by degree, industrial engineering, and I am currently a program manager at a manufacturing facility, I'll say. And
Okay.
yeah, so I manage a couple different programs there, and in my free time, same as turf. Like I've always loved to be outside in the lawn. Um,
Okay.
I'm originally from North Carolina, so
Okay.
I'm originally a country boy that is now living in a more urban area. So uh, looking at some point to be able to get back to those rural roots, which is
Hmm.
where I feel a lot more comfortable and where I want to be able to stretch my legs and also put down my own roots. So yeah,
Perfect.
at that point, my dad's he's been a big component of me being out in the lawn. He always maintained his, and I was like, when I buy my first house, I'm gonna do it just like dad, but a little bit better. And that was one of the things that I strived for, and bought our first house up here in what, about 6, almost 7, would be 7 years in June. And about
Okay.
4 years ago is when, about 4 or 5 years ago is when I really got into the lawn, and I was like, all right,
Hmm.
I'm gonna go work for that dream, and I'm gonna go ahead and make that happen. And then along the way, I found YouTube. I found Turf, where at the time he was also here in Maryland.
Hmm.
So we kind of linked and connected at that point. And I also decided, yep, I'm gonna go ahead and get my fertilization certification. So I did that. I went through all the trinkets of having to do that. So I am able to actually, on the side, that's what I do. I do some fertilizations for a
Okay.
couple of lawns here in the area. So yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of
Perfect.
where I'm at.
All right. Well, nice to meet you. Pleasure.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. That we unpacked that. That's good. So you're a soil guy, um,
Yeah.
at heart. So I think
Hmm.
it's only right for that to be our first topic. Y'all ready to go ahead and get this started out there? Thank you for
Do
being
it.
here, everyone. Yeah. So look at that. We still look. I'm glad this happened because we haven't even talked about my man Polo. Polo couldn't be here tonight. Let's go ahead and make an adjustment to that. Polo couldn't be here tonight. He sends his wishes. But that's our first topic, right? We're gonna roll into what soil tests should we avoid? Are they all created equally? Why should we avoid those particular ones? All right.
Mm.
Um, and let's start with the fundamentals as Dr. Shaddox sees it, as the doc sees it, which he has this interesting little pyramid here. Would you go ahead and speak to this for a moment?
Yeah. So, I do soils, I do soil testing and nutrients and essentially fertile soils is what you call the top of this little pyramid here. That's my area of turf grass, and other people deal in weed biology and light physiology and all these other things. My area is at the very top of that, which is probably the least common issue. But this pyramid, represents the relative occurrence of risk factors in the world of turf grass, in my opinion. And these factors occur at the lower part of the pyramid. They occur more frequently. And then as you go up, they tend to occur less frequency. That's not to say that that's always the case. So generally speaking, for example, at the bottom of this pyramid, which is the largest box, is water. So water tends to be the most common risk factor. It could be too much water, it could be too little water, it could be poor quality water. But it tends to be the risk factor that if considered first, generally will address a lot of the issues or problems that you're seeing. But I don't want to necessarily say that's the case with all cases, so in all situations, because the water could be fine, but it might be it might be December in say Orlando, where the light is lower, or it could be December in wherever, and where the light in the northern hemisphere, where the light is much lower because of the seasonal changes. And then at that time of the year, it might not be water as the number one risk factor, right? There might be light. The reduction in light might be the number one issue, causing a reduction in turf quality. So they can kind of shift and move depending on the house or the lawn or whatever, depending on the time of year. But generally, water, and it tends to be more common than light. And then you may have light dialed in. Well, then it might be temperature. That might be the next most common risk factor. And if all these that pop up, fertile soil, or really it should be infertile soil, tends to be the least common risk factor. Meaning, if you were to address all the potential causes of your problem, infertile soil is usually the least common that comes up. If you address the water and the light and the temperature and injury first, you probably solved your problem long before you ever get to identifying infertile soil as the source of your problems. But infertile soil could be, and that's the reason we end up doing stuff like what I do when we're looking at soil nutrients and things like that. So that's sort of how to look at this graph in the world of turf management. So if you have problems, what I tell people to do, you go out and turf grass isn't growing in this spot, for example, or I just can't get the turf it's too thin here, or it's too yellow here, or whatever the case might be. Start at the bottom of this pyramid and start checking off boxes. Is the water too much or too little?
Mm-hmm.
Is the light too low? Right? The light issue tends to be more accepting or more easy to understand when you look at like annual flowers or like tomatoes. If you grow a garden, you can't grow tomatoes underneath a tree very easily, right? You need the tomatoes in the bright sun. So it tends to be more clear, I guess, in other plants. But for some reason, people tend to forget that most turfs need a lot of light. And so
it's funny you say that, because I have a saying that I say all the time, and a lot of people's like, why do you say that? I was like, I'd rather grow turf in full sun with irrigation than to try to grow it in the shade.
Yeah. I mean,
it's
so it's
tough.
really hard. There's some things you can do to help, grow it taller, lower the fertility. Fine fescues tend to be better than tall fescue. There's some things you can kind of do. But at the end of the day, you're not going to find a warm season grass that grows in the shade. I mean, very easily. It's going to be very difficult to find a grass that will grow well in the shade, particularly warm season grasses. So it's just, just be aware of it.
It gets real touchy. When those light conditions are low.
Yeah. And one thing, people tend to like be connected to trees for some reason. I'm okay with trees. I'm okay with any plant. Whatever. Do whatever you want to do. But if your light is a problem, you would be hard to find a valid. Well, I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is, cut all the dead disease trees down first. I mean, I don't think an arborist is going to say, no, keep these dead disease trees up. Start looking and managing your trees in an appropriate, management practice, best management practice manner by removing dead trees, removing diseased trees, then remove dead limbs from the tree. In other words, manage them, and you can at least help alleviate some of the shade problems without having to cut the whole tree down if you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel on that pyramid. Try to work your way up that pyramid before you ever get to infertile soil. Your chances are pretty good that you'll find your solution.
Right. And let's say we worked ourselves up that pyramid and we still haven't found any solutions. And now we're at infertile soil or soil that is deficient in specific areas, because when you say infertile soil, you're saying it's lacking a particular nutrient, or maybe it has too much of something, right? We're not just saying, hey, there's nothing there, right? Possibly. Yeah. And these are your best management practices that align with that philosophy as well. And I think Cam and I, we like to hone in on that number 3 test when you have a good reason. And here on YouTube specifically, we tell people, hey, start out with a soil test, because chances are you don't know anything about that lawn. You have no data inputs on that lawn. And we want to see if you are lacking. It's a very small nominal fee that you only have to do once every 3 years for some regulatory issues most of the times, but you could probably get away with not doing it longer than that. But that good reason for us when we're trying to help people, give them strong data points and easy decision-making points. We always say, hey, start out with a soil test. But you live in a world where maybe it's an overuse, misuse, abuse, and you've seen it when it comes to soil testing.
That's a good way to explain it. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, I would say that soil testing, the value and the reliance upon soil testing has not been. I'm saying this from an academic perspective, so I'll blame myself.
No,
has not been thoroughly communicated to home DIYers or golf course superintendents, anybody, sport turf managers. There is an assumption that the interpretation of a soil test is correct. So what I mean by interpretation, when you take a soil test, Cam, and it says your phosphorus is high, that's the interpretation. The phosphorus is high. You're assuming, well, correct me if I'm wrong, you're assuming that the phosphorus is high because the soil test said it was high. You're not necessarily questioning how they know that it's actually high. So someone like myself, my job was to ask those questions. Well, how do you know that it's high? Who told you that it was high?
Right.
Not you, the DIYer. I mean, you, the soil testing lab.
Yeah.
So when I've gone in and done these tests, these phosphorus calibrations, I didn't do those. That was done after my time at UF. We've generally found that they're nowhere near the levels that they said were high. When it comes to potassium, it's nowhere near the 80 or 100 parts per million malic-3 that they say is high. It's usually much, much lower. In fact, I don't know of a case where it wasn't much lower when we've actually gone in and done the correct correlation with the soil test value. So my position on a lot of soil testing now is I would just avoid it altogether unless you're trying to diagnose a plant problem. That's the step number 1. Use soil tests to help diagnose a plant problem. So in other words, Cam and Robert, if you're growing your lawn and you don't have any problems and you've never had any problems, then there's really not a good reason to soil test, agronomically speaking. And let me just say this. I'm not going to get in trouble because someone showed this to some mayor of some city and said Travis Shaddox don't soil test, and the law says soil test. If the law says soil test, I can't control that. Okay. So follow the law in your area. But agronomically speaking, if your turf grass looks fine and there's no pre-existing condition, then there's really not a good reason to soil test. And sometimes the last couple of months, I've been getting the question, well, what about if you just started or you just bought a house or you're growing in a new turf? Well, that fits my definition if it's not growing to your expectations, because you don't have any reference of how it's growing. You just bought the house and you show up and it's just there.
Right.
You don't know if it's growing your expectations because you just showed up one day and there it is. So in that case, I feel, in my opinion, that would be a valid reason to soil test new sports fields, new home lawns. These sorts of things that you have no frame of reference would be a good reason. But I just want to make sure it's clear that I'm on on the incorrect assumption. And like I said, Robert and Kim, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm under the assumption that the end users, being you all, people like yourself, are just simply assuming that the interpretation is valid. You're not questioning whether or not it's valid. You're just seeing it and saying, okay, that said it's high, so it's high. Is that true? Do you think that's probably the case with most people?
I can definitely say that was me probably the first year into doing lawn care. I didn't even last a whole year. I asked too many questions, to be honest. So, but that was me at some point of time where whatever someone told me or whatever I saw the values, I just took them at face value. And then, if it wasn't for guys like the reports that we've read over the time that we've been doing this, Matt Martin, Ray, I see Ray down there, and he's in the chat, I think. Ryan DeMay, those guys really helped scratch an itch of wanting to know a little bit more of where these numbers are coming from and how are they being utilized and how do I reference it? How do I turn this into some type of tangible, actionable information out in the lawn?
Yeah.
So, but I think for the masses, though, absolutely, it's just you take it at face value.
Yeah. I think you're right with that one, there, Doc. It's the same. That's you kind of take it at face value without understanding really a lot of the other interactions that go on. Even the data that you get back, you could look into some other things that'll tell you, if you have the knowledge, just off of that soil test, hey, this may not really be a valid reading, or it may not be what you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if there is one thing that I'd like people to walk away with, I guess a little bit here is, one, the pyramid slide is the most important, probably. If all they remember is that, start from the bottom and work your way up. That's good enough. I'll count that as a win. But
boom.
If all you remember is that, start from the bottom and work your way up, then the chances are that we're going to be in a better position than we were. But the next thing would be, when it comes to the soil test itself, when you get these reports back, I just want people to and I think most people probably do this. I don't want to say this in a way that presumes that people don't do this. Okay, so don't be offended if you're doing this, then great. But we're not growing soil. That sounds like a simple, like, well, duh, but we're not growing soil. We're growing turf. We're growing plants. So the soil test must be connected to a plant issue. It has to be a plant-related action. Okay, so if you don't have a plant problem and you've never had a plant problem and you've never had soil issues that have somehow caused plant problems, and the turf's growing fine, then please refrain from soil testing. And then, like I said, there's reasons to soil test. Like I said, if you just show up, then it meets my definition. You don't know if it's growing. It's not growing to your acceptable level, right? And so that, there are reasons. But please don't take a soil test and then just look at the numbers and then try to follow the recommendations to the point where you're trying to add nutrients to meet a number on a soil test.
Yep.
Let's say your potassium is, let's say it's low, and let's say it's 30 parts per million, maybe like 3 or something. And it says, oh, you should be at 40 or 50 or whatever. That may be true. Absolutely. There's good evidence to support that. But if your turf grass is fine and you're applying a little bit of potassium and your turf grass is fine, but your number's not going up, that don't keep applying potassium because you want to see a number go up on a soil test. That's chasing numbers, and we do not want to chase numbers on a soil test. We are about growing grass, growing turf, growing plants, not about moving numbers up on a soil test. So that's be the second priority.
I like that.
I will admit to early in my career, like my first soil test ever, that was my philosophy. That was my thought. That was my thought process. Was and I'll admit to it. It was I gotta get these numbers within optimal level,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they considered was a optimal level.
Yeah.
And we'll get into some MLSN type stuff and later
Mm-hmm.
on, but uh, as I've matured and learned a lot more, those values they're there for a reason, but you don't have to chase every number and value on a soil test. They let you know what's going on, and they can be a guide if you are seeing, like you said, solving a turf growing problem or a problem area.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Cam, what you did early on is very, very normal, very common. I wouldn't feel bad about it. Um, but we're learning. There's a reason
Yeah.
why people say doctors say, "Oh, I'm practicing medicine." They've been doing it for 30 years and they still say they're practicing. Okay, so we're the same way. So we're still practicing, but the key is to be open and willing to accept change and move your management practices whenever you have a good reason to do so. And you've done that in the past. Okay, hey, you learn something and you move on, and now you don't do that. And that's what we want to see, progress. So
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
I
agree with you.
agree. And I mean, that perfectly lines up that number 7, follow the recommendations only when they have been calibrated. Now, there's a lot of assumptions on things being calibrated. And that brings us to one of the soil tests everyone should avoid. And hopefully you haven't come across this type of soil test, but if you have, as Doc says, turn around and run the other way. I'd like you to speak to not just the soil test in particular, Doc, but when we say, how do you know when it's been calibrated, and how do you know it's been calibrated properly when they say it's been calibrated? Can you speak to that as you cover this soil test we should all avoid at all costs?
Okay, so I'll just say this. There's going to be that is a much more dangerous question than I think you realize you're asking. So I'll say this, not just about saturated paste, about almost every soil test in turfgrass. Okay, the ag is completely different. I've said that before. Ag's different. Okay, ag they got a lot of it figured out, but in turfgrass, and I'm going to leave an open door because I don't know what Penn State did, and I don't know what Rutgers has done, and Auburn, and I don't know what some of the other universities may have done this. So it's very, very possible that they have things calibrated. However, I am only aware of 1 or 2 calibrations on soil tests on turfgrass anywhere in the world. It's almost never done on any element, on any extractant, almost ever. Calibration, not correlations. Correlations are more common. Calibrations are very, very rare. And a calibration will tell you the amount of a nutrient that you need to apply to alleviate the deficiency, right? It's very, very rare. So I'm not saying they don't exist. Someone can definitely post something and show them that these can happen occasionally. I know for sure there's one on phosphorus on establishing cool season grasses. There's a calibration done on those. So they do exist, but they're very, very rare. So it's best to assume that whatever recommendation you get back from the soil testing lab, when I say recommendation, I mean like apply 2 pounds of K, apply 1.5 pounds of whatever in or whatever. That's the recommendation. And that recommendation comes from a calibration. So it's best to assume that's probably not accurate. It's probably didn't come from a calibration. So the question was, how do you know? The only way you're going to know, and it's not by calling the soil testing lab. Don't do that because they don't know. Call your land grant institution specialist. So for Florida, they don't have one. Kentucky, they don't have one. But that was me. They don't have that anymore. But like for Penn State, I'm assuming it's Dr. Schlossberg. Max is there. For and then in the northern central, I'm assuming that it's Dr. Soldot who handles some calibrations up there. But if they don't have it, he will know, right? So I'm assuming Dr. Beasley would know, like in Louisiana. So if the answer is we haven't done it, then that's the person who would know they haven't done it. So you would have to call the land grant institution specialist in that region. It doesn't have to be in specific state. Like if you're in New Hampshire and you're living in the state next, there's areas of the regions of the country that I think are fair to kind of group together. But they are out there. There are some people out there that do these work, and you're going to have to call them. So unfortunately, that's the only way you're going to know. Because if you call a soil testing lab, they're either not going to know, or they're going to say yes, and in fact they don't. They did it on alfalfa or something. So they're not very common. They're not very typical. So On saturated paste, so what the saturated paste test, which I love. There was a faux pas made on a previous podcast, and I'm going to start using it now. The person called it saturated pest test, so I'm going to start using that, the saturated pest. So saturated paste is just so people understand, if they're listening to this and they're not watching this, they're watching the show, they're listening to it. Saturated pest. I'm going to say pest. Saturated pest is a soil testing method that is basically no value outside of pH and salinity. And what it does is basically you put in DI water into the soil, and then you extract that DI water from the soil, and then you measure whatever nutrients were soluble in that solution. And it's very interesting, guys, because it seems on the surface that's pretty useful, right? And so the plant can only take what's in the soil solution. So I want to know what's in the soil solution. That seems pretty valid. That seems like a good way to go. But it's not. Okay, don't do that. And it's what I do is it's almost exactly the same situation as the Theranos situation, the company, the blood testing company. So yes. If we're familiar with Theranos, the company now, the CEO is going to jail. I don't know if she's in jail yet, but yeah. Where she was saying, we can run all these tests from a drop of blood, and all these tests look great, and people were going, "Oh, that's great." But all the people who knew, the scientists who knew how to do these things, were all going, "She's crazy. This can't work. There's no way she can do what she's doing." Right. And that's the same thing with saturated paste, where there's a lot of companies that sell fertilizer based on saturated paste, and they want to go out and they do all these saturated paste tests as a means to sell you something, usually. But the soil testing specialists who know how these work, I don't know of one who condones this work. Not one. They all will, and there's only 3 or 4 of us, but we'll all say it's bogus. It doesn't work. You can't do that. And the reason is because when you only measure what's in the soil solution, which, yes, in the soil solution is where the plant gets their nutrients from, at least the ones that they can get from the soil. That's where they get it from. When you only measure that, you have no ability to predict what's going to be available over time. And that's what a soil test is designed to do. It's designed to predict nutrient availability and plant response to that availability over time. And when you only measure what's in the soil solution on that day, we have no idea whether that's correlated to a plant response, whether or not there's a calibration done to recommend a nutrient application based upon that, what's in the saturated paste extract. We don't know. It may eventually be determined that it is valid, and somebody throws a bunch of money at it and they figure out, yes, we can do this. But right now we have no idea. We have no idea if there's a correlation there. There's definitely not a calibration there. And this table that you have up on the screen here is some work we've done here recently and published, where it shows basically half of golf facilities in the United States are using this method to determine their phosphorus analysis, which is not what.
I'm saying it's way off compared to its counterparts.
Yeah,
like 3 Brim,
and
Olsen.
Yeah, it's really. And I don't know this. I'm going to deviate from evidence and my expertise to opinion here. Okay, this is going to be my opinion. Okay. But in my opinion, I think what people get sold on is the idea that, one, it's only soluble what you're measuring in the soil solution, so that makes sense. Guys, it doesn't make sense. Don't do it. Okay, regardless of if it makes sense, it does not. Please stop it. But 2, when they see the number, this is my opinion, because the number on a saturated paste is so much lower than any of the extractants, Malix or Olsen's or any of them, because the extractants it's called an extractant for a reason. We're extracting a nutrient out of the soil that is not immediately soluble, plus what was soluble. Mm-hmm. So when we only look at the soluble component, it's a very, very small number. Usually it's like 1 part per million or less, 0.5 parts, very, very low. And an end user, a DIYer or whoever, a turf manager, can be convinced, oh my, that's so low. I'm not used to seeing these numbers. I'm used to seeing 30 parts per million on a Malic 3, and this is only 0.1 or 1 or whatever. I'm so low. Even though Malic is 30 parts per million phosphorus, I only have this much available. This is showing me that hardly any of the phosphorus is actually becoming soluble, right? That's the connection that a lot of the salespeople will try to do. this much is in the soil, but oh look, only this much, this portion is becoming soluble, right? And it's so low, so you have to. I think that's why people become convinced. Don't be fooled. Phosphorus is one of the only elements that we have a great deal of confidence on soil testing, and we are, pretty confident that if you're anywhere near the 20 Mehlich 3 number, and I'm talking in acidic soils here when I'm talking Mehlich 3, when you go into the alkaline soils, you got to do a different test, but we're pretty confident that 10 to 20 is you're going to be fine for the upcoming season. It doesn't matter what the soluble saturated paste component of that soil was. It won't matter. We've done enough work where we're pretty confident it's probably somewhere around the 20 number. So if you're 30 or 40 or 50 or higher, and the saturated paste is 0.1, don't get fooled. You do not need to apply phosphorus. This is Theranos, pulling a wool over your eyes and tricking you into taking some blood when you don't need it.
That. I'm going to do something special with that. You just don't know what kind of ideas you sparked in my head, especially when you talk about thumbnails. I'm going to run with that. But okay, so when you're talking about saturated paste, Doc, it sounds a lot like resin-based tests. Okay. And we have a lot of those out on the market right now, super popular. I was even very interested in it at some point. Are they the same thing? Are they different? How are they different if they are? And where is the professionals? Because when you say published, man, that means it's been peer reviewed. Your peers have a chance to come back and say, nah, I don't like your work here. I don't like your work there. I understand that. Where does the community sit when we're looking at resin-based tests?
Resin. Okay. So another great question. So let me start with how they're similar, because there's very little similarities, but there are some similarities. They're similar in the sense that both tests provide an estimation or a value of what was soluble, or what the root would likely encounter. That's probably a better way of saying it. So in the case of saturated paste, we're measuring the soluble fraction. In the case of resin-based tests, they are pulling out a portion of what is soluble, exchanging it for what was on the ion bead to, with what was in the soil solution. So there is some similarity there. So the idea of the resin would be to provide an estimation or more representative value of what the root might actually encounter when it's growing, something along those lines. So that's the similarity there. But they are different in the sense that the ion exchange resins and beads and how, whatever they're using. And I told you this right before we started, I was completely oblivious to the commonality of ion exchange resin in DIY community, in the lawn care community. I didn't know there's that many tests that are using this. I had no clue. And I saw one, I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, they have a little bead or a little ball basically in a jar, and that's the process. And the idea behind that is that it's more representative of what the roots encounter. And what I wanted to say was that I'm not an antagonist to that method in theory. I actually do think that given enough resources and research and effort, that may actually end up being a very useful tool in the future for us in the lawn care community or turf community in general. It may be that, in fact, this is the direction we need to go in the future. Yeah, right. Because there is some work in ag, and there seems to be some pretty good evidence in ag that, okay, these are probably the values that you need to be at on the ion exchange resin beads, and in order to maximize crop yield and so forth. So there may be something there, but at this point in our experience and in our progression in turf science, there's really not much evidence at all and in fact, I don't know of any evidence at all to support the use of ion exchange beads in turf. And so what I mean by evidence? What would I need to see? What I would need to see is a correlation between the ion exchange bead and a turf response. So let's say the ion exchange bead came back at whatever 0.5 parts per million phosphorus. Well, is that correlated to what the turf response is? In other words, is that enough? Is it lower, do we see the turf quality go down? If it's higher, do we see the turf quality go up? Is there a correlation there? And if there is a correlation there, then the next step would be to provide a calibration to recommend products, rates, and things like that, right?
Gotcha.
So I haven't seen any of that at all. Full stop. And there was a professor at Utah State, I think he was at Utah State, I can't remember, was asked a question like that at an ASA meeting once. And they said, the question was, and I could actually show you the video, I have it on my hard drive. The question was, where do the commercial labs get their recommendations from? In other words, how do, when they provide a soil test recommendation back, you need to apply, whatever, 1 pound of phosphorus per 1,000, whatever the number is. Where do they get their recommendations from? And the professor said, when you find out, you let me know.
That's not a good answer.
Because no one knows. No one knows.
That's awful.
No one knows. And so until I see it, or until, another professor who specializes in this area, I can talk to them and they can see it, whatever. I have really no confidence, essentially zero confidence. I can't ever say 0 or 100% of anything, but essentially zero confidence in any recommendation or any number on an ion exchange bead. Keep in mind, people, before I get crucified for this, I'm not saying it won't work. Right. I'm saying I'm not convinced that it will work because I haven't seen any evidence to support that.
Right, which is why I kind of led in with published, peer-reviewed data, research, numbers. There's just so many questions that aren't answered. And I liked what you said, though. Future, where are we going with this? And I look forward to see where it's going. But right now, based off what you're saying and the data that does not exist, we're kind of at it like, this is a project that we're building. Cam, that's one of your projects that you're working on, and you're in the baby phase. What phase is this? What phase would you call this in your line of work?
We're in development.
We're in development phase. Okay, all right.
We're in development phase.
And for me in the military, we got crawl, walk, run. We in crawl phase right now. We're in
crawl of what? What, Ken? What are you working on? Of this type of technology?
No. He's an engineer, he just project management and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I knew that language would speak to him.
At
the end of the day, folks who are using those tests. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I spoke over you. I'm sorry.
It's one of those. It's one of those where we got some good ideas. We're out executing some things. We've got some. We've got some prototypes out, and we're working through some things. But
we're building data inputs.
Yeah, we don't have all the information quite just yet. That's the way that's where I see we stand, and I think with Doc, he's in the same boat.
Right.
Yeah. See some potential.
Yeah. So Doc, before we move on, real quick, before we're going to move on to the next thing, just real quick, is that people who are using those ion exchange tests, I would just say, and there's no law against it, but keep in mind the 3 or 4, there's only 3 or 4 of us who specialize in just doing soil tests in turf. None of us are convinced that they are of any value. None of the so the consensus of the scientific community on this issue is ion exchange resin beads in turf grass management. At this point right now, I cannot interpret, and we have no idea what the numbers mean. Just keep that in mind.
Okay. You say it's only 3 or 4 y'all, Doc?
Well, there's only 3 or 4. I mean, me and Beth and Doug. I mean, I don't think Max does much anymore, and I don't think Beasley does anything in here anymore. I think he's doing more soil stuff. So I don't think there's not many of us left. And Beth and I are out of academia now. So, I don't mean to leave anybody out. I don't mean to be somebody out there who specializes in this. Please don't, please forgive me if I left your name out. But there's only a handful of us who do this work, and I now feel bad because I'm going to leave somebody out and they're going to be offended. I don't mean that, but
no, I more so said that to emphasize the point that this is a small niche community that you guys are all in agreement on too. Like, you don't find it. I mean, it's only 3 of us in the group: me, Polo, and Cam. And me and Cam usually agree, but when we don't agree, I mean, there's usually a hard stop somewhere, and we're like, okay, shake hands. We walk opposite directions. So I can appreciate that. You guys are all on one accord. You're mojo on that topic.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak for Beth or Doug, so please.
But for the most part,
when they're watching this, I apologize. That's not my intent. They can speak for themselves. But generally, I don't know any evidence to support using. I barely know evidence to support the normal Malic 3 one. I mean, there's just not much there. So imagine take that to many levels separated, and that's where we are with ion exchange. And if somebody wants to dump a couple of $1 million in my lap and go do this research, I will accept it and do the research and happily prove myself wrong if that's the case.
Just a
but
couple million?
we need, yeah, we need resources. We need grad students. Yeah, we need money. We need time, and we can go out and do the test and determine and prove if I'm wrong. That's fine.
Doc, I ain't got it. I got $1 or $2 for you. Matter of fact, I got $10 from Super TA. Thank you. That's what we're going to do. We're going to donate that straight to you. We're going to start a GoFundMe for you to contribute, because I want to see it, and I want it to be a real solid thing to stand behind. And like you said, the one that you do, the two that you do have some confidence in, with the most information out there, I would imagine, is your Malic 3 and your Olsen in specific pH conditions for phosphorus. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to phosphorus, I would have pretty good confidence in a state, a land grant institution providing a recommendation or a interpretation, maybe not a recommendation, but interpretation of the test. There's a fair amount of pretty good numbers and pretty good evidence to support, if they say it's low or say it's high. I will say this, and I'm probably going to catch some heat on this, but I mean it in the most positive way. I tried to get the University of Florida to change the Florida regulations, and they wouldn't change it, regardless of the evidence generated by their own faculty. For years, they wouldn't change it. But just here recently, in the last month, finally, the committee at University of Florida has changed their recommendations, or their critical limit. It was at 50 parts per million, even though their faculty showed it was closer to 15 or 20. And here recently, thanks to the consistency of Dr. Unruh, he was able to actually get them to lower it to the level where they found it to be in their own research, which is now 20. So land grant institutions are coming on. They're slow to move, and they probably should be slow to move. But I'm just saying that the reason I'm saying that is that I do have some general confidences in the phosphorus extractants. Yeah, there's some good enough numbers there to have a fair amount of confidence in for the extractants, but not saturated paste or ion exchange. Gotcha.
And that's also in relation to turfgrass, right?
Yeah, for turf. Yeah, that's all I mean. Yeah,
specific. Right. When we switch to ag, they got their stuff together over there.
Yeah,
yeah, they do a lot more work.
Ag's a little different.
Yeah. So and all this in this particular study, and guys, I think I'm going to build a folder for a lot of this information. If you really want to nerd out, I mean, he gave us quite a thick syllabus to read through that I enjoyed, and we're condensing it dramatically for you here tonight. Still all great talking points, I think, and I feel like we're getting some good feedback in the chat. But I'm going to build a folder and I'm going to link it, and you can jump on the drive and download this stuff and take a peruse at it. But one of the interesting findings that came out of this study was that you found that there was a reduced usage of soil tests for nutrient applications, and this was, I think it's worth highlighting. These aren't DIYers that these numbers and these values are coming from. These are professionals, greenskeepers. So I think that's good that you guys were able to shift a mindset of not chasing the number, not chasing that value, and because it's just it's a thing that's been driven into the mind, that it's just a do because someone told me I was supposed to do, and now I chase this number to try to get to where I'm supposed to be. So I think that speaks volumes, and it just goes to show your hard work. I hope it made you feel good. Maybe. Well,
I don't know if I had anything to do with that number. Talking about, when we're talking about this, for those people who might be listening, this is the chart here where it says fertilize based on soil test results, and there's different management practices, and that was one management practice that people used when they're with the intent of reducing reliance upon fertilizer. So they're fertilizing based on soil test results with the intent of reducing the reliance, right? And we did show a reduction of closer, like a little bit above 50 to closer to 40%. I don't think I had much to do with that. Who knows? But I do think it's a good movement. It's a good data point to show people who, I mean, you guys are professionals too. I mean, if you're doing this and you're getting paid for it, you're technically a professional. But you have turf managers in golf who they might be more educated, might not be more educated, whatever. But there tends to be fewer people doing that in golf than there was in 2014. And I think that's a good thing. And until we have more confidence in these numbers, the soil test values and recommendations should be used very cautiously, in my opinion. Very cautiously.
Like a doc. So I've always heard, right? Organic is so much safer. And something that I seen popped up into your study as well that really jumped out to me was this line right here. And if you could speak to this.
Let me read it here.
Yeah.
See what I wrote.
It's your work. But
okay. Yeah.
I thought that this was, this aligns with Marilyn regulations. Cam and I, we were speaking, but I thought it was interesting that you highlighted it here, and I think it's worth speaking. Yeah. I mean, it speaks volumes, Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what happens a lot of times, and again, this is my opinion, I'm going to opine here for a minute, is that it seems to me, from my experience, that some people prefer to use natural or organic based products or management practice, however you want to call it, because they're doing that with the intent of being more beneficial to nature, or being less impactful to the environment, or creating less pollution, or reducing the risk of environmental issues. It seems to me like a lot of people will do that for that reason. But oftentimes, particularly when it comes to natural organic fertilizers, the exact opposite is just as likely, if not more likely, to occur. And so let me explain this a little bit.
Please.
When natural organics, by definition, are the byproducts or the waste products of plants or animals, right? So they come from organic compounds in our bodies or in the plant itself. So they'll be bound, their molecules bound with other elements. So it might be, proteins or amino acids or whatever it might be. And because of that, the nitrogen is limited to a certain percentage. I think the maximum it can be is, someone can pull this up, I'm sure it's either 13 or 16%, because that's the maximum that nitrogen percentage can be in an amino acid. There's some amino acid that has, I want to say 16%, I can't remember. But anyway, the nitrogen percentage has to be very low because it's from a natural organic product. It can't be 4600, right? It's going to be very low.
Yeah.
And because it's natural organic, it's going to come on almost all cases with a little bit of phosphorus. So if the nitrogen is low and the phosphorus is there as well, and let's just use, I'll use the names left out of it. Let's just use like a municipal biosolid, which may be a 640 or a 540. 5% being nitrogen, 4 being phosphorus. That's a very common analysis for natural organics. You may get slightly different ones, but generally the nitrogen and the phosphorus will be at very similar ratios, or very close to the same ratio. And because of that, we cannot apply one without the other. We can't just pull the phosphorus out because it's actually part of the molecule. In some cases, the phosphorus is actually bound into a molecule with the nitrogen or another molecule in the natural organic. You can't they're not blended together. They're homogeneous basically because it's a molecule from a natural organic. So when we apply the product, we apply municipal biosolid for nitrogen. That's what we're going to do. We're going to apply half pound of nitrogen or a pound of nitrogen from natural organic product. You're also applying a very high level of phosphorus. And in most cases, when I say most cases, I mean more than 50% of the cases, we don't need any phosphorus at all. But people are applying the natural organic because, it's natural. I see the bag at Home Depot or Lowe's, or I see it from wherever, and I want to be natural. I want to help the environment. But you're not helping the environment when you're applying phosphorus when you don't need to. Let me make that clear. You will never benefit the environment when you're applying phosphorus in a situation where you don't need to apply phosphorus at all. That needs to be very clear to people. There are cases when phosphorus is needed, no question, no doubt. And when I say needed, I mean the plant growth is being retarded by the deficient level of phosphorus. It's being slowed or it's declining. And the phosphorus is the only way to alleviate that. So there are clear cases when that's necessary. But in the great majority of cases, phosphorus is not needed, but you're applying it with your natural organic. That is a huge, huge problem. So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's better for the environment than a synthetic fertilizer. That is a huge mistake to make. So when you apply natural organics, it really, and I encourage anybody, really, you too, or anybody else, to post it in chat or ask me now on this thing. Give me any good agronomic reason to apply a natural organic other than the following. When you have a phosphorus deficiency and you apply the natural organic based upon the rate of phosphorus, that's the way you should apply it, and that's when you should apply it. It is very difficult for me to think of any other good agronomic reason to apply a natural organic other than that.
I'd have to completely align with you there, Doc. And the only reason why we would know that we need to apply that phosphorus would be one of the better methods of soil testing. So that came that came full circle.
Okay.
Well, for me it did anyway. Because I mean, how else would you know, right? How else would you know that you had that nutrient deficiency other by eye, which then you would further inspect to find out if you had a soil deficiency? That would
be a good reason.
And the way of finding that soil deficiency would be by testing, and or if you have no data inputs when you first land on the lawn. It could be because I see common simple ways of taking care of your lawn is, it's spring 10-10-10. I mean, Cam, your dad, what he used to drop on that lawn for that centipede lawn every year, he was dropping what, triple 13 or something? It wasn't even the 10. Was it 10?
Yeah, it was triple 10.
It was a 1-1-1. Yeah,
it was a 1-1-1. I mean, and it was just the way that he did it, and I think that goes into a lot of the previous philosophy of that's just kind of what you did. And without having a lot of the data and stuff that we have, or at least looking for the information that's now available. And here in Maryland, we're even regulated by those organics also. So if you want to go down with just a compost, like you have to have the soil testing to back up, and you have to be in deficient levels to be able to show that you need to apply those organics or that
deficient level of what?
Of P. Of P.
Oh, okay.
Perfect. If you're not deficient in P, you're not allowed to. You're regulated to not be allowed to put those type of organics down. Yeah, I didn't know that they regulated or natural or compost going on. Maryland, we've got a lot. We've got a lot more regulations than
the Bay Conservation
than most states.
Okay,
that's what it's called, right? The Bay Conservation Committee, Cam.
Yeah, and there was also Chesapeake Bay, like the watershed, Act, the Chesapeake Bay Act. A lot of that added a lot of new regulations, especially surrounded around P.
Yeah, I do feel obliged to preface what I just said. Actually, I'm not prefacing; I'm saying it after the fact. But it's possible that a natural organic exists without phosphorus. I would actually like to digest that and run phosphorus to see if there's actually no phosphorus in it, or they're just not putting it on the label. But it is possible that a manufacturer is chemically removing the phosphorus from the natural organic before it goes into manufacturing into the distributor. I guess that is possible, I suppose. So if it doesn't have any phosphorus on the label, and keep in mind, not every state requires what's in the bag to be on the label. So it could be in the bag and not be on the label. I'm not saying that's true with the natural organics that have no phosphorus on the label. I'm just saying that if there's no phosphorus on the label and it's a natural organic, it's possible there's no phosphorus in there. And in that case, that would not, that there wouldn't be an issue applying that product in terms of phosphorus risk, assuming that there actually is no phosphorus in that fertilizer. So I just wanted to make that clear. I didn't want to,
No, it's a good caveat. I like caveats.
Yep.
Okay.
I got another one for you. I know you don't exist here in these YouTube streets, as we would say quite often, Doc, but another thing that you typically see is overselling or misinformation on gypsum, particularly. And you had a nice little excerpt in this study that I didn't clip it and put it in here because I just couldn't find a clean way of doing it. But I placed this up here as a good reminder. And you'll hear people say, gypsum is great for compacted soil X, Y, Z, and I see data that says gypsum is great for two things, right? It's a practice proven thing for two things. It's for sodic soils, which are typically found in the northwestern region and not too much anywhere else other than that when we're speaking of the United States of America. And then sulfur, attacking those sulfur deficiencies and inputs. And I also threw this chart up because you pretty much between all of these soil amendments, we see an uptick on all of them, minus gypsum and sulfur. And I wonder if there's any correlation there or if you had any more to speak to gypsum in particular.
So specifically about gypsum? Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, gypsum for those people who, I don't want to speak lower than everybody or higher than everybody, but I'm assuming, let me just not assume anything. Gypsum is calcium sulfate for the people who may not know that. I apologize if you already know that. So let me discuss the two situations where you would consider using gypsum in your management practices. One, and this is something I actually just ran the numbers 2 days ago, is like, as you mentioned, for sulfur deficiency, sulfate, gypsum and ammonium sulfate come in at the lowest cost of sulfur per pound of sulfate sulfur. So gypsum's around 9. Now, when I say that, I mean the cost at the distributor. So you would still have to pay shipping, and they would mark up or margin, the fertilizer for their profit. But when it gets at the manufacturer, when it gets at the distributor level, what that cost is, okay. The gypsum is around 99 cents per pound of sulfate sulfur, and ammonium sulfate is around $1.01 or something like that. So essentially, they're the same per pound of sulfate sulfur. So when you have a sulfur deficiency, which we may or may not go into, but it's probably going to become more common now than it has really ever in anybody's experience because of the way we've been cleaning up our emissions in the industrial processes in the United States. We've been lowering our sulfur in the atmosphere. Anyway, if you have a sulfur deficiency, then gypsum as well as ammonium sulfate, they're going to be approximately equal in their cost and how to alleviate that. Okay, so that's number one. And to be frank, probably the more it's not used now that way to any great extent, but it probably will be used in the future to a great extent to alleviate sulfur deficiency as we see that becoming more common. The second major reason is to alleviate sodic soils, right? So when you have a sodic soil, what basically happens is the sodium is in the soil to such an extent that it disperses the clay, and we have a great deal of water permeability issues. Basically, the clay becomes, when it's dispersed, the water it loses its structure, and we have issues with water and movement and so forth. And the presence or the application of gypsum will help flocculate that soil. And I don't really like using the word structure, but it'll sort of recreate the structure, allowing water movement to move through. So with the application of gypsum and followed by water, it will move out that sodium, and it'll help alleviate sodic soils. Having said that, it is a very rare thing. When I say very rare, I mean I'm talking the United States as a whole. It's not common to have turfgrass growing on a sodic soil as a whole. Now, you might be in a region where it is very common, in wherever it might be, New Mexico or Montana, I don't know, wherever the sodic soils are over in the Southwest or Northwest United States. You may have every lawn be sodic soil. So if you're listening to this and you go, Travis Shaddox is crazy. Well, no, I mean, in your area, it's very common, but in the United States as a whole, it's not that common. So use gypsum to alleviate sodic soils, but only in cases where you've diagnosed and you've had a sodic soil specialist come in and they identified this. And they said, yes, you have a sodic soil problem, and that's why your turfgrass looks bad. Then gypsum can help. Otherwise, sulfur would be the only other reason to apply gypsum. And someone, a contrarian might say, well, you can also apply it for calcium deficiencies or whatever. But I've never once seen a calcium deficiency in any turfgrass setting that was actually bona fide. I know Dr. Christians tried to do that on putting greens, and there was no calcium deficiency. It's extremely difficult to induce a calcium deficiency in turfgrass. So applying calcium for the calcium is that's futile.
Okay. I have extremely sodic soil, but also have very high calcium.
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't looked at how's your turf look?
No. That's a comment down in the chat.
I didn't see that.
I'm pulling that from my good buddy Aldo, and I thought that was an interesting statement. Do you have anything to speak to that?
Well, I don't. Well, the first thing I would say is, how's your turf look? I mean, I don't really. Yeah, if your turf looks fine, I don't care what the soil number says. I use this mental I'm sorry. I use this mental exercise with some faculty friends of mine. And I'll say, okay, because they sometimes like to chit chat with me about some of my positions on things. And I say, okay, you don't believe potassium does this or does that or needs that, whatever. I say, okay, if your turf grass is fine, let's say your turf grass is a 9 on a quality scale, it's growing great. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's say theoretically, I'm not saying this is possible. I'm just saying theoretically. Let's say theoretically you take a soil test and the potassium, well, let's use calcium. The calcium is 0. Would you apply calcium? And most people will say yes. I would say no.
Because
I would say no. Your turf grass is fine. It's growing fine. You don't have any problems that are manifesting in an appearance that is unsatisfactory to you or your clientele. I don't care what the soil number is. It doesn't matter to me what the soil number is unless you have a turf problem. Now, if the gentleman who had that quote, if he has a turf problem and he says, hey, this turf, I can't get it to grow, I'm trying everything I can, then let's talk. Absolutely. I'm 100% on board. Let's sit down and work through it and let's try to diagnose what's going on. Absolutely. I'm 100% on board. But it has to start with, is there a turf grass problem or is there a pre-existing condition that you're trying to treat?
Absolutely.
Great question.
Yeah, no, I love it. And this just leads to one of what you got, Cam. I see you got something.
No, I think you're gonna go there. I'm good. I'll hold off. I think.
Okay. All right. Yeah. This leads to all of these were their amendments, and one that jumped out to me immediately was the humic materials and their increasing use of the humic materials, which is a perfect segue to our next talking point, Doc. So here we got another one, Polo, the ghost of Polo. Let me just fix that real quick. Humic acids are very popular, controversial in some regard. And
what makes them controversial? You said that earlier too.
Yeah, so it makes them controversial because of the claims that come out about them. Almost to the point where Elder E. Gilbert, he said, what product or products can I use to increase the efficiency soil on Bermuda lawn? And a common answer that he may get is humic. We don't know anything about his soil. We don't know what his soil test looks like. We don't know if he's even having an issue with his Bermuda lawn. Maybe he's just trying to give it something extra. And the recommendation would be apply humic. Humic will help with everything, right? That is pretty much how it's presented. And I fell subject to that in some regard. Cam did as well. Even Polo did, because when you come in, you don't know what you don't know, and then you start digging and doing a little bit more research. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse because I'm not going to steal any thunder from Cam. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I just wanted to open up with that. And Cam saw some stuff that pretty much caught his eye in some of your studies that he would like to talk to you about.
Okay.
Yeah. So a big part being here in Maryland, and also a lot of the information that I put out is surrounding a lot of the cool season turf. So looking at the studies and stuff here that were done, especially on Kentucky bluegrass, which is a big part of that here in my area, and being able to look at it and the addition of humic substances to fertilizer treatments and a lot of times it's all right, let's go out with some additional humic when we get to those stress periods, or we're trying to recover turf grass, or we're getting ready for a lot of those high traffic type of situations we may see. And humic has been presented as a product or an amendment to be able to help with that. And a lot of the data and the information that was presented here was not really supporting those type of recommendations outside of, hey, just fertilize it and I think you could get to the same result without having to add those additional products. So one of the things that this show and this live stream was about was, hey, why are we putting down some of the products that we are, or are there ways for us to save money and not have to add those additional amendments? Is this one of them? If we're looking at these type of scenarios, that maybe we could skip some humic applications and end up with the same results.
Are these slides from the thing that I sent you?
Yes, sir.
Is that from one of my presentations? Oh, it is. Okay. That's how it looked familiar.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So, yeah, these are some slides from AJ that he did. I guess he was at Iowa when he did these things. So let me preface this by saying this. I have to wear, and I, to be frank, I think most turf professors should wear, and they probably do wear two different hats. I have to wear a science hat. I have to be unbiased. I have to be as unbiased as I can. I'm a human being. We're all biased, but I mean, I have to look at things objectively and do my best to find what is reality. What is actually going on. But on the practical side, I have to be a pragmatist at some point. I mean, I can't sit and do theoretical work all day long. It doesn't do anybody any good. So I'm saying that to say this. I can't say that any product doesn't do anything. Okay. I can't prove a negative, right? But that's the problem that we run into, because as a scientist, I'm bound by certain scientific ethics. I have to say what I can show and prove, and say what is true. I can't say something doesn't work. This isn't going to happen. This doesn't work. But a salesman is not bound by that same scientific ethic. He can say whatever he wants to say, and I can't say it won't work. I can't say, don't use humic acids. It'll never work. I can't say that as a scientist. As a pragmatist, I can say that. As someone who's just practically speaking, I can say humic acids may be beneficial in some very limited situations. Okay. Oh, are you going to say? Oh, sorry,
I think you were going to say the one thing. Just sit on that for a minute, Doc, because I do want to give humic some regard. But I feel like there one place you were going to go with that. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are some cases where you get the stars to align just right, or you happen to be one of the lawns in Sodic soils that I mentioned. Sodic soils are not common, but you happen to have one. You could very well have that case. We're dealing with millions and millions of people who have lawns and maintain stuff. So, if even 0.1% have that specific case, that's still a lot of lawns, right? There's still a lot of grass that happen to have that specific condition that it could have benefited from. Absolutely. So I can't say it's never going to work. I can't say it won't work. What I can say is the majority of the evidence, and one, I'm not a humic acid specialist. And there's a lot there that I don't understand and don't know, but it seems to me from the knowledge that I have on the literature that for the most part, humic acids, the application of humic acids are going to have very little, if any, beneficial impact under normal conditions, under most conditions, I would say. That's what I think the literature would support me with, or I'm communicating that. But please understand that's coming from someone who fully acknowledges there are plenty of people who know copious amounts more things about humic acids than I do. Okay, so I'm not a specialist in humic acids, but to answer your question directly about can we do without it or not do without, I would say I would say that the likelihood of you needing it or benefiting from it or solving your problem because you applied it or it however you want to say it, the likelihood is pretty low. Okay. But it's possible with any product. I mean, you could put Kool-Aid out there in the lawn and it might solve a problem too. I mean, it could. I'm not being facetious. It really could. I mean, I don't know. I can't say it won't. But here's the key, and this is something I've neglected to say in the last year in all my talks, and I'm glad I remembered it now. Cam, let's say, I'm just hypothetically speaking here for a second. Let's say your lawn is, or Robert too, whoever, your lawn is at 80% of where you want it to be, whatever you want to call it, color or growth or density or whatever. Let's say you look at your lawn, you're like, it looks good, but it's just not where I want it to be. I need another 10 or 15% of something. I need it to give it that extra edge, And let's say you do apply humic acid product and it's just the humic acid. Okay. It's nothing else with it or whatever. And you see a response and you get the response you're looking for. Now you're at 100%. Let's say you get that. So let's say you increased your quality or your standards by 20% by using humic. The question I have is, could you have achieved that same response just by applying a little bit more urea or a little bit more ammonium sulfate or spraying out a little bit of iron sulfate or whatever it is? In other words, the cost to achieve that little extra edge, that I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I mean, if that's what you desire, then that cost to do that could have been achieved in a less expensively by using another product. And the likelihood is extremely good that it would have. In other words, just apply a little bit more urea or a little bit more P if you're P deficient, or a little bit more iron sulfate as a liquid. That probably would have got you that point without having to break the bank on buying something expensive like a humic acid or whatever. So use that mentality. Hey, I want to get this. I could get it with humic acid. I'm not saying you could, but let's say you could. But what would be the most cost-effective method? Well, maybe just a little bit more urea, a little bit more nitrogen. A little bit more iron sulfate in the foliar application or whatever. Maybe that's all I got to do. Chances are pretty good. That's the answer.
You're really leading us into some good stuff. Hey, if you're hanging in there with us, I promise you guys, it's going to be worth the wait. We're about to the halfway point. Not to say that the rest is going to take another hour, because I don't think it will. We're going to breeze through a few things, but that just remember, what Cam presented here is a question that you may ask yourself all the time, and this is what the data says. We're trying to be as unbiased. Yeah, as he said, we're human, so we are biased. I think myself and Cam are always weary. And once we have educated ourselves about something, someone presents something to us, we want to see the numbers. We want to see where it makes sense. And this data is saying, it's not worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But this isn't a beat up on humic type event, especially since I just had a humic specialist on the show not too long ago. And he's,
what did they say?
But, his name is Russell Taylor, and he didn't oversell the humic acid products as a fix-all, be-all. He was very specific, and I'm going to show you here. This kind of correlates with he was speaking to us about. And he said, humics, in certain instances where he really likes humics is soil types, low CEC soil types that don't have the ability to take really long looks at the fertilizer that are coming through. Now, that goes without saying what you said. Hey, can I use a product? What's Ray's favorite is Umax, right? He likes to throw some Umax in there to extend life of things. But in this particular chart, and this is one of many studies that support this data that says, now we're thinking about saving money, guys. So what are we doing? We are making sure that we optimize our inputs to the best. And in this specific chart, this is agriculture. This is corn, right? So what are farmers doing? They want to make sure they don't spend not more than one dime that they need to increase profit margin and be able to deliver the most volume of food as possible. In this particular study, it was shown that when humic was used alongside in these controlled release fertilizers, it increased the efficacy of the nitrogen uptake specifically.
What's the NO? Does that say NO?
It just means no. It means no without any N fertilizer. So the true
okay.
Right.
And
so
then
you have the controlled release fertilizer is the CRF, and then the HACRF is adding humic acid to a controlled release fertilizer.
Okay, I'm with you
And
now. Okay.
these increase the volume, the values across the board on all these things. Now you can look at those numbers and ask yourself, well, could I have done this by applying a little bit more P, or optimizing my application? Sure, you may have, and you very well could have been. But this is just data that does support that humic can work in certain circumstances when those stars align. But the problem is that I see, I'm gonna be completely honest with you, in our realm of DIY marketing, whether you be a beginner, a hobbyist, what was the words we came up with? A hobbyist, enthusiast, and professional. Is that it's being presented as, hey, you just make it as frequent. You make these applications as frequent, but no one's actually saying, okay, now and then you're also throwing down as much pushing it to the limit and this thing. So it doesn't really correlate with the data that supports where you and how you should be using the humic. It's like, hey, it'll help do all these amazing things. I'm sure we all heard them. Dr. Shaddox, you have been blessed to not have heard them, but it's a really good pitch, and it sounds good, and it sounds promising, so you run with it. But the whole theme of the things tonight is what products are you wasting your money on? Do you actually need these products? Are you in these particular circumstances where it would help you? And I think the jury out is on this particular product is probably not, maybe, but probably not. And with keeping spirit, unless you had something else to add, Mr. Dr. Shaddox, we're gonna.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Yeah, I'm actually reading that article. I'd have to see where that article is pulled from. Like read it. Further.
Yeah. I can send it to you. There's numerous ones I could have clipped from. I rolled with this one specifically because it was corn, and corn is relative to it's the closest that's relative to turfgrass in itself. So let's move on. So are we spending too much money on fertilizer? And this one jumped out to Cam again. He was like, hey, man, Turf, we got to have this one in there. This me all day. So I'm going to step back and give the floor to Cam and let him talk about it.
Cam, do you actually call him Turf? Or you?
Yeah, that's the nickname.
Yeah, I actually do. I actually do call him Turf.
Okay.
So to me, like this one again jumped out to me. Going along with the theme of the show here is cost, and then also being an applicator running a business. Like, so profits is kind of what we're in this game for. So you also want to be aware of those. The more that you can reduce the cost of your inputs going in, but also get the response and the results that you're looking for, hey, that's a win. That's a win-win in those type of scenarios. So when I looked at a lot of the data that was presented here, so what we're looking at is a couple of different fertilizer sources and a lot of the AIs that are in there. Looking at your XEUs, your UFlex, and also your ammonium sulfate, which we're a fan of, and then your ureas and your polycoats. So then you also pull in your organics. And then based off of the conversation that we had before, now we kind of compare our organics versus our synthetics. And are we really getting the best bang for our buck when we start to go down with some of these products and we compare the two? So just kind of walk us through what we're seeing here between the two of these, and what's the benefit and the takeaway between our synthetics and also our organics here?
Okay. So I'll start on the graph on below. So those people listening might not be watching. The graph below is talking about measuring in response. And so what we generally have done historically is we will say a fertilizer lasts, 16 weeks or 10 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever. But if you look in the literature, actually, I encourage everybody to do this because I can't find it. And maybe somebody put 100 people on it. Maybe someone can find one. if you look in the literature and try to find the length of time a turfgrass actually responds to these nitrogen fertilizers, you won't really find it. You can infer some numbers from one of Dr. Soldat's older papers, but he didn't actually go in and measure that exactly from, it wasn't the intent of the paper. But you can infer it from one of his papers. But you can't find, I put out urea and the quality lasted, 10 days or 110 days or whatever. You can't really find that. So the graph at the bottom explains how I did that. So where it says days after application of turfgrass qualities on the y-axis and days after application on the x-axis, we're looking at the length of response. So what I wanted to know here was I wanted to know how long does the turfgrass actually remain acceptable following the application of these nitrogen sources. I don't care what the manufacturer says how long, polymer-coated urea lasts or how long urea formaldehyde lasts. I don't care about the number in a lab and whatever manufacturer. I want to know how long does the turf respond to these things. That's what you want to know as an applicator, as a homeowner, as a DIY. How long is the turf actually going to respond to these things?
Yep.
But you can't find it, so we did that, and so we did that. We went out and we applied all these different products, and we measured how long the turf remained above a turf quality score of 6. So if we applied it, and it took a week to get above 6, then that's when we started the clock, if you want to call it that.
Okay.
And then as the nitrogen waned off, we stopped it, and then it's real simple. It lasted 89 days or 63 days or whatever. But a colleague of mine and from the fertilizer business said, well, Travis, that's great. We want to know how long it lasts. But some people don't accept turf quality of 6 as acceptable. They want 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever. So what he was essentially saying was he wants to know the magnitude of release, the magnitude of the quality response, basically. Not just the longevity of the release, but the magnitude, how deep or dark or green and dense and all those things. And so that's where you come into the area under the curve. And so now, if we move to the top graph where we're looking at costs, that's where you see the cost per pound of N, cost of longevity, which is just using the length of response, and then the cost of longevity and magnitude, which is the area under the curve. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it didn't make a difference. It didn't make a difference. I mean, you can see they were all still basically the exact same. They were all more expensive than urea. And so what I did was I just what do you call it? I can't remember the statistical term, but I just used urea as the benchmark, and I just said, okay, how much more expensive than urea were all these products? Because everything was more expensive. And to make it more simple to understand, I just put, X times greater than urea or fold greater than urea. So on the left side of the axis is XCU. So XCU, if you buy the cost per pound of N, is 1.5 times more expensive than urea. So if urea costs $600 a ton, then XCU was costing $900 a ton or whatever. Okay. I'm not saying that's the case. I can go back and show you the numbers, but that's what I mean by that. And if it was 2, if urea was 600, then let's see, I guess maybe duration is 2 times more, whatever. Then duration was $1,200 a ton or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's the way to read that. And so when we balance out the response longevity, so let's say the orange bars in that top graph where you're looking at cost per longevity, what that's doing is it's taking the cost of the fertilizer and it's factoring in how long the fertilizer resulted in a turfgrass response above 6, right? So if urea, and I've said this before to someone else, if urea lasted, let's say if the turf response to urea lasted, say 6 weeks, that's great, no problem. Costs $600 a ton. If polymer-coated urea lasts $1,200 a ton, or costs $1,200 a ton, but it lasts 12 weeks or 13 weeks or 14 weeks, then polymer-coated urea's got some meat on that bone. I mean, there's a story to tell there.
Yeah.
But we didn't see that at all. We did not see that even close. So urea, the response to urea was much, much longer than we expected. The turfgrass response to urea was equivalent to all these N sources applied either at 1 pound or 2 pounds of N. We didn't see polymer-coated urea lasting, we did it for the whole year. So we did 4 applications. But let's say or 3 applications. Sorry, let's say the whole year was 200 days of response. Let's just say that.
Okay.
I have to go look at the chart. I don't have it in front of me. Let's say it was 200 days for palm coated urea. Urea was basically the same. we didn't see any difference. So the longevity of response was the same. So now you're looking at, well, not only is it the same, it needed to be twice as long as urea, and it's not even different from urea. So when we factor that in, it doesn't change the cost. When we factor in the quality of response, the magnitude, right? Longevity and magnitude, it still didn't help.
Not much there.
Didn't help. So in other words,
for the amount of money, for the amount of extra money that you're spending on those products.
Yeah, you're not getting. If I don't mind spending. Honestly, I've sold fertilizer that was $3,000 a ton. I mean, crazy expensive stuff. I don't mind that as long as I'm getting something out of it. Right. Like I don't mind going and spending $60 for a steak, but I better get a $60 steak.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to feel like I could have cooked this better at home.
Exactly. Exactly, Robert. So that's one of. Yeah. So I don't mind spending $50, $60 for a bag of fertilizer. Honestly, don't. But I'm better get a $60 bag response, and I'm not getting that. We have not measured that, and so that's what this says. And on the far right hand side are the natural organics. And if you're in natural organic world, and one, apply it based on phosphorus. Apply it based on the rate of phosphorus, please, because you're not helping the environment applying it based on the round pound of N. Please stop doing that. Apply it based on the rate of phosphorus. Yeah. But if you're applying it based on the rate of phosphorus, so be it. Just understand it's costing you 5 to 6 times as much as the same response would cost from urea.
Yep.
And that's what that graph is saying.
And again, that just goes along with the theme of what we're talking about here. Are you getting the bang for your buck when you're out there going with the organics, or you're going with a lot of the different, I'll say, specialty type fertilizers out there? Not bashing any of them, but the thing is if you are looking for those specific scenarios, maybe you're looking for something different out of them, which is a reason why you're doing it. But if you're looking for what the average DIY homeowner is looking for, which is response, color, and vigor, like those type of things, the data is not supporting spending that additional money.
It's that brown bag of urea over in the corner of Home Depot with half of the bags are ripped open
with the dust falling on
the ground, got the dust on top of the bag. It's that bag of urea that you just, it's hard to beat that bag. Now, I'm saying that just like the pyramid slide. I'm not saying it's always the case that water's the problem. I'm not saying it's always the case that urea is always going to be all you need. I mean, we have clear examples where urea is not all you need. But, to my sort of stepwise process in blending fertilizer, start with nothing. Don't apply anything unless you have a good reason. Pretty good chances you're going to have to apply nitrogen. Okay. And then don't apply anything else until you have a good reason. And the good reason is the turf isn't responding well or it's not growing well. And then you can start to stepwise, walk through the process of, working through the nutritional, likelihoods that you're going to see a response to certain things. But urea, ammonium sulfate, those, that's basically, most of the time it's going to be all you need, so if you're, to your point, Cam, if you're looking at making the most efficient program, it's going to start with urea, and it's never going to change unless you have a good reason. And that is because the turf grass is not growing to your acceptable standards. Then consider changing it from there. Now, having said all that, I'm sure there's hundreds of examples that you can give me that, you need to apply something else. But.
And so just along those lines, one of the things that I would like to say, and I don't think we have it in here, but it was a point that I wanted to talk about was sulfur deficiencies. And then as we get into ammonium sulfate, and I think you may have a little, it's in there.
Kinda. We got one picture that you can
Okay. All right.
it it,
I'll
it,
hold. I'll hold
it
that
can
one.
kind of
All right.
correlate to
Okay.
that for sure. Yeah, but no, it's because even you gave me. We'll get into it when we get to that slide. I do want to address some comments that I see popped up, and I'm
Okay.
glad you said it, Charles. Charles, he said this data is very helpful. I'm glad that it's helpful for you, but I have to admit it is a little overwhelming for the average person.
Oh yeah.
And here's what I find:
Mm-hmm.
it can quickly become overwhelming when you don't understand the foundational language with things. That's with anything, right? And shameless plug, I'm doing a 5-part series. 4 parts are out there. The 5th part is coming. It's not time for the 5th part yet, so give it about a week or so. It'll be out. It's coming though to make that. But that was all to build you a basic foundational language and understanding the language that we're speaking, right? Because we could very easily tell you, we could sum up this whole slide right here and say AMS and urea are your
Yeah.
go-tos. That's what you
Yep.
should probably go to. Start with urea, and maybe if your pH is
pH. Yep.
borderline, you can go with AMS, or if you're lacking in sulfur, you can go with AMS, or if you're not seeing a response from urea and you don't like the way it looks, then try AMS, or vice versa, right? And that's the
Yeah.
summarization of what we just presented it to you. But we like to give you receipts. We like to give you the receipts so you know where your coins are going, the hard-earned coins that you've earned, and you're just not throwing them out there. So we like to think that we're building blocks here and helping you absorb this information, not just so you have the right answer for the moment, but you can go walk in the store and you can go to your big
Yep.
box store and make educated decisions that you don't have to continuously rely. We're teaching you how to fish. At least we're trying to teach you how to fish rather than give the fish to you. So I'm really happy that you appreciate this data and it's very helpful. And I know that it can be overwhelming in the beginning, but give it some time. Check out that definitely check out my 5-part series. Right now it's a 4-part series. I talk a lot of language. You'll probably have to watch the video more than once or twice. But I say all that to say, if you want a lawn like Cam's, if you want a lawn like Polo's, and you want a lawn like mine, and special emphasis on our lawns look like this 90% of the growing season, no matter how bad the weather gets, it's because we have these intricate details. Anyone can make their lawn look good in May when you're a cool season lawn. If you're a
I
warm
like
season lawn, all your lawns can look good in June. You just throw some urea on it. But it's the June, July, August, that's where you separate
fourth
from
quarter.
those fourth quarter, the men from the boys, so to speak. Horrible analogy to use right here because I don't want to seem misogynistic or anything, but you get what I'm saying. So if you want that, and we got to set expectation management for you, because rant's almost over. We walked into lawn care doing what the easy button was, and we all hit roadblocks. We all hit blocks, and we were trying to figure out how to sustain that throughout the year because our passion was that high for it and we were that interested in doing it. So we had to dig deeper to understand these minute details and this overwhelming statistical information to better save the coins in our pockets, right? And to get the desirable results that we want for the majority of the season. So we went down the road of doing the cookie cutter thing, the basic thing, the easy 3 steps, and your lawn will look great. But the thing is, June, July comes and it just completely tanks and falls off. And we wanted to know why.
Mm-hmm.
So then we spend this time reading through the syllabus of information that Dr. Travis Shaddox provided to us, and then we try to condense it. I mean, these articles are much more dense than this, but we took the points to try to kind of just point out to you. So my rant's over, but I just wanted to because I like seeing that comment, man. That's a solid comment. And I know how you feel, and just know that you don't stay there forever if you put a little bit of effort into it. You put a little bit of work. That's why we call ourselves the We Working Team, because it's going to take some work. It's going to take some work. It's not a whole bunch of work, but it's going to take some work. I just don't want to lie to you and make you think that, oh, it's just this. Lawn care is simple. Doesn't mean that it's easy. Sometimes it's going to feel a little hard, but it is simple. I promise you it is. All right. I think
And
okay.
and you hit the point that I was going to hit at the end is that is going to take a little bit of work. And the thing is a lot of that understanding is you notice we haven't called out a single product. We haven't mentioned a single product name. These are ingredients, philosophies, data that's behind it, that you can now go to a store knowing that you have this information, flip a bag over, and now look at the ingredients that are in it and be able to make a decision for yourself whether or not if this is going to be beneficial to you or not. That's what the We Workin team is here to provide you with, that type of information that, as Turf said, now you can go fish for yourself.
You can go fish for yourself. Now, I think that's a perfect segue into this is a hot one right here, right? Because not all micronutrients are created equally. Are they, Doc?
True.
Yeah, they're not created equal. So let's go ahead and roll into the next one. So oxide versus chelated micronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another big one that I've seen kind of blossom over the past 2 years. As time goes by, very quickly, I'm being in this game for, we're going to hit a decade before we blink our eyes, Cam, and just think about how much we've learned in such a short period of time. But
yeah,
Cam, this is your slide. I'll let you have it.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
So looking at it, one of the things is, as we get into the micronutrients, I mean, there's, again, you flip that bag over, there's a lot of claims from the ingredients that are in it and what the response and the benefits of those products are, being especially when you come to micronutrients. So you look at a lot of the bags out there that you can go get, and there's multiple forms of micronutrients that you can get in there. You see them listed on the bag. But what are you really getting out of those micronutrients, and are they really benefiting your turf, which is what you're putting it down for? So this was one of the graphs that really stuck out to me. And hey, it says it's got micronutrients in the bag, but am I really getting what I think I'm getting out of it? Can you walk us through this one here, Doc? And
Yeah.
let's see what we've got here.
Sure. So there's a whole 2 or 3 hour long preamble to this graph that I will obviously not go into. But this graph that we're looking at here has, for the most part, all the iron sources that you're going to come across. For the most part, there might be one or two that someone can throw at me. But the idea was, I did a lot of work with iron over the last 7 or 8 years, whatever it is, and I was curious why. Okay, briefly, when I was in the fertilizer business, we'd stand next to these 3 or 4 ton blenders, which is actually a very small blender for a fertilizer company. And we put in 4,000 pounds of this and 500 pounds of that and whatever, and we put these in these blenders with these big front end loaders on a scale. There's a huge, like, several ton scale in front. And they put in these massive front end loaders, but the micronutrients would be gone in with a little, like, ice scoop out of a bag next to the thing, and they dump in like 15 pounds or 40 pounds, or whatever. They cut up in the bag and dump up 150-pound bag into a 4,000 pound, or what? I guess it'd be 4 tons, so it'd be 8,000 pounds. I mean, and I thought, well, how in the world can you measure a response to that? So that's the impetus to this sort of work when it started, when I was back at the fertilizer company when I used to work for. And so from that, it developed into this sort of one of the last studies I ever did with iron. And I wanted to know, is there any solubility in the soil to the iron sources that we use, commonly? And the take-home message is no, not unless it's chelated. So you can use iron oxide. You flip the bag over, so everybody can go home tonight or out in their shed tonight and open up the bag of fertilizer, flip it over, and look on the back of that thing that says guaranteed analysis, right?
Yes.
And if it says iron 2% or manganese 3% or whatever, well, let's just stay with iron for right now. I'll move to manganese in a minute.
Down. Yep.
Yeah, but it's clear. I'm glad you made that little slip, though. This isn't just for iron, right?
Well, Yes. This here is just for iron. What we're looking at here in terms of the solubility is just for iron.
Okay.
So the solubility of iron, oxide, humate, glucoheptanate, all these sources, this is very specific to iron.
Okay.
The solubility of manganese and zinc and boron and all those things are very different than iron.
Okay.
So, so with iron, if it says, actually, I'll just say this, guys. And this is the pragmatist, this is not the scientist. If it has any amount of iron on a granular fertilizer, it's almost complete waste. It's essentially, there's no reason to put iron in a granular fertilizer. Now, if it's chelated, there's a possibility there's some value there, but it's going to depend on the pH of the soil. Okay, so, like for example, EDTA is soluble, but it's not soluble at all in soils above pH of 7. Right. So if it's above pH 7, EDTA is there's no use to it. It only maintains solubility below pH 7, and DPA if it's above pH 8 is useless, and EDTA is useful for any pH. So EDDHA is useful for essentially any soil pH you'd ever encounter.
Yeah,
it maintains solubility.
Must be why a good friend of mine uses that source.
Yeah, it's extremely expensive, but also very, very soluble and maintains solubility up into the 13s and 14s. I mean,
he wants to make sure he gives the best, so that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
But even with those chelates, just so you know, if it's a granular, you still have to apply a magnitude of the product to get a response. So it's like taking aspirin. You take, 1 or 2 aspirin to cure your headache. You take 200, it'll kill you. But if you take 0.1% of one pill, it's going to do nothing. So it's the same thing with iron and any of these micronutrients. You still have to apply the right rate to get a response, right? So the amount of iron you can apply through these chelated sources in a granular form, is usually nowhere near the rate you need to apply to get a response from. Mm-hmm. You just can't put enough in the fertilizer blend to get it high enough, because the raw material in these things is like 5%. The iron percentage of, say, these chelates are 5 to 10 or 11%. I think EDTA might be 15 or something, but they're very, very low percentages. So to get enough in the ton to get a response, you have to just dump a huge amount in there to get it in the granular fertilizer. And the reality is, you can get a response from those same products. Just spray it out just spray it, don't spread it. So, so really, spray it, don't spread it. But so really, the take-home message from my work that I've done with iron, you can go look all this stuff up if you want to. There's several publications on it. Is just do yourself a favor and eliminate all iron from granular fertilizer. Don't apply any. And if you want to apply some, you don't need the chelates at that point, because you're going to apply it as a foliar anyway. If you're going to apply it as a foliar, just apply iron spray grade, not soluble. I misspoke, not soluble. Spray grade iron sulfate. There's a difference between soluble and spray grade. So spray grade iron sulfate, apply it at anywhere between 1 and 5 pounds per acre, not 1 and 5 pounds per thousand. You need to sharpen your resume if you apply that at 5 pounds per thousand. you will lose some customers real quick. So it's 1 to 5 pounds per acre. Spray grade iron sulfate, you're good to go. But applying it as a granular in a fertilizer blend is, as you mentioned, Ken, we want to figure out how to do this the least expensive way. Granular iron sulfate is almost completely a waste of money. I am very, very convinced that granular iron of almost any kind is a huge waste of money. Chelates, you will get a response, but you got to get the rate in there. You got to get enough you got to get enough pounds in the ground, and that's going to cost you a lot of money relative to spraying it out as a foliar iron sulfate application. So that's my take on that. But go ahead.
Put a bow on
it. I like that, and I like the fact of being able to explain from this graph what we're really seeing is what happens that is not available. Like it's now it's not soluble for the turf grass to be able to take up. Nothing happens. You're not getting anything out of the claims that you're paying for.
So anybody watching this, who's ever got a call from Miss Jones and said, hey, there's a bunch of red spots at the bottom of my pool, or my patio got a bunch of red spots on it, and you have to go in there and clean that up. You just wasted all your margin on going and cleaning up a mess that you didn't even need to make to begin with. Because what that is, that's a sidewalk outside my house in Gainesville, Florida. And what that is that fertilizer, the guy came by and spread that fertilizer, and my irrigation came on before he could come by and blow it off. He didn't blow it off. It was still there when my irrigation came on. And those little brown spots is the oxidation of iron sulfate on the surface of that concrete. And it happens very quickly, in less than 20 minutes. You go out there, and what I'll do in some presentations, I'll start the presentation. I have a 50-minute presentation. I'll have a thing of iron sulfate, and I'll have a white paver. I go buy at Home Depot, wherever I'm talking. And I put the paver on the table, and I sprinkle some iron sulfate on there, and I just put some regular water and just sprinkle it over top of that at the beginning of the talk. Halfway through the talk, you look at the paver and there's red spots all over it. That's how fast it happens. Happens very quickly. And what that is your money turning to rust is what that is. And you see the same thing on the surface of the soil, the exact same process. This is some Bermuda grass down in Fort Lauderdale that I was working on. I just wanted to show that it doesn't just happen on concrete. We usually see it on concrete because the turf canopy covers up whatever's happening in the soil. But in this case, I'm growing in, I don't know what turf this was, but it was Bermuda. I don't know what Bermuda species, but I was growing it in. And so you could see where all the iron sulfate stains and oxidation was occurring because the canopy hadn't grown in fully yet. But the same process happens in the soil. Iron sulfate oxidizing to iron oxide. So even if it's soluble in the granular, it's not going to be soluble for long once it hits the soil.
Which is now useless to the plant.
It's useless. It's iron oxide. It's rust. You might as well just throw some nails out there and hope they rust. You'll get just a better response from them probably. So, yeah. So it's one of these areas that I just happen to be passionate about. I've done a lot of work with iron, and I'm as confident as I am with eliminating granular iron. I'm equally confident in saying you will see a response from foliar applied iron sulfate. We've done, I think the last count was 14 studies. All 14 studies included a foliar iron sulfate application as a treatment, and all 14 saw a response.
And so to be clear, this chart is reference for soil application. This
granular.
is how it's reacting in the soil.
Yes,
just to be clear for the audience, if you're looking at it, this is correlation specifically for the soil.
Correct. Yes.
I like EDHA.
Your waist.
That's what I've called it because I always get all tripped up.
EDHA?
EDHA. I call it EDHA. And we were talking about in the chat. We can't remember if it's got 1D, 2 Ds, 2 H's. Which one is it? That's EDHA.
Well, there's probably some value in that. I know it's illegal, I think, in the EU, but I mean, there's probably some value to that. And if you're so inclined to apply to the soil, I'm not going to say don't do it. You're just going to spend a lot of money to get the same response you could apply.
It's just good to know. Like you said, we flip over the back of the bag and we know what the claims are and we know what we should be looking for. If you got to go granular, you know what you're looking for if you're going granular. If you're just a granular guy, you don't want to spend the money on the backpack sprayer. I think you're wasting a lot of money if you don't, me personally, for a long-term gain when it comes to a horde of things, not just even with fertilizer, when it comes to your herbicide plans, fungicide. We won't go down that road though. It's okay. It's okay. That $150, $200 can save you $600 then 2-3 years down the road. But you know, hey, the take of it, Justin, perfect. You brought it full circle for me. So he says, just apply iron in liquid form, chelated iron in liquid form. Got it.
Succinct. That's what I like. Straight to the point. You got it, Justin.
I'm sure I got a sound effect down here. I don't want to go fooling with it and black something up. So, I don't want to do that to your ears.
And what's really I can't even go into the big box stores because I get so freaking depressed when I go buy the fertilizer and it shows the bag. It says 2% iron, darker green, or greening effect, or whatever. And it's like, oh my gosh, they got everybody fooled. And actually, I'll leave the names out of it because I don't want to get sued, to be frank. But I was on the phone with the VP of, well, I'll just say whoever. Okay, a fertilizer company. And he asked me, he said, do you think we'll ever get a granular iron source that'll show response? I'm like, you got it on your fertilizer bag that says greener grass because of the iron. You know, so they
You
know.
already got it.
Yeah,
know.
they know that they know the product's not doing what it says it's doing.
So Travis,
but they still put it on the fertilizer bag.
I
But
said,
see,
I opened up a video, I think it was last week, and I said, a lot of these companies, they're throwing this stuff on the bag, and I don't even know. I don't know if it's because they don't know or if they just don't care. And you just answered that question for me, because I genuinely asked the question, because you don't know if they don't know or if they just don't care. And it seems to, at least that one company, they don't care.
That one company.
They don't care.
Who is
I doubt they're
very,
alone,
very large company knows. And they just, the marketing is what they're going for. And they know people want to see that on the bag. I'm assuming that's what they want to see. That's what they think. Course. But they know, or at least that particular person knows, who is in charge of the whole rodeo. He knows they're not going to see a response to granular iron.
No, you're going to see it from urea and that sulfur.
See, the thing is the information that we're given right now, though it may seem overwhelming, the thing about it is you can, just like Justin did, you can make it very simple and concise, and you can bring it down to, hey, when you walk in, you can at least look at the front of the bag and know that you need to flip it over and really understand what's on the back side of that bag on the little guaranteed analysis, and then scroll down a little bit further and it tells you what those ingredients are in that bag. So those are just some of the things that we're bringing forth here to help you save money, which is one of the things that people have been bringing up a lot, and we understand the reason why. Here's trying to give you a little bit of that information if you can be able to go fish for yourself on that topic.
That's right. Amen. Let the church say amen. Hey, check it out. So we got the last topic that we're going to hear for you. Thank you guys for holding in there. I'm imagining you're getting something from it because you've been hanging around. You've been hanging with us. This is probably one of the longest lives we ever done. But you know what? I feel like it's the best. And I'm going to chop the heck out of this up and make it into a whole bunch of short videos for you guys to easily digest, turn it into a playlist, because this is just one of the best lives I think I've ever been able to be a part of. I won't even say host. I'm just
appreciate your host.
Appreciate I was scrambling over here. So the last topic we want to get into, there's one other product out there that has some pretty big claims. So let's get to it. So, potassium. I mean, potassium is you hear it in the fall, Travis. And I know you're not on these YouTube streets like we said, but in the fall, you got to have that potassium. And then right before we get to summer, you got to have that potassium, right? And these are the claims of this potassium. I mean, I fell subject to it. I can't say that I'm not one of them. I believed it. It sounded good. It made sense on the surface. And this is when we went to check for those receipts, and they came up missing. So some of the common claims right here is up on your screen if you're riding and you're listening. We got it increases rooting. It's a great winterizer. It reduces disease occurrence, increases wear tolerance, and increases drought tolerance. These are some of the most common claims that we see in the realm of potassium. And like I said, we had our syllabus assigned to us by the professor, and we dug through the material, and we loved every single bit of it. When I put the folder together, guys, I'll probably give me a day or two. I'm gonna link it. You can go to the Google Drive. You can peruse this information and read it for yourself. But this particular one, the takeaway that Cam and I agreed on was this was probably one of the most big ones that we wanted to put up here front and center. And it reads, potassium applied to these areas should equal approximately 1/2 the amount of nitrogen. Figures 1 and 2 show that increasing K potassium from a nitrogen to potassium ratio of 1:0 to a ratio of 2:1 increases both K concentration in turfgrass leaves and turfgrass quality. Snyder and Sizer, 2000. Further additions of K up to a 1:1 potassium to nitrogen ratio may increase leaf potassium concentrations during certain seasons, but does not enhance the turf quality. Applications of potassium above a 1:1 ratio are not evidence-based practices on Florida fairways, tees, and approaches. Now, I know that was a lot, probably seemed overwhelming, so we're going to go ahead and unpack that a little bit and, uh, simplify it, the so what of it all, right? And Cam, this was your slide. I'm sorry, I just realized I stole your slide from you. But if you got anything to add to that before Dr. Shaddox goes ahead and does his thing with it, go ahead, brother.
No, you good. I needed a break anyway. I think I've been on my soapbox a little long.
Doc, what you got for us?
Okay, so let me first preface by I'm going to go into potassium here, but let me first say this. There are clearly documented cases of turf grasses responding to potassium in the scientific literature. However, they are extremely rare, very, very unusual. I've been doing this for a long time, and I have never once seen a beneficial response to applying potassium. Not once. Okay, so it can happen, but when your turf already has a sufficient supply of potassium, applying more isn't going to help. It's not like nitrogen, where there's some nitrogen already mineralizing in the soil, and you apply more and you see it growing. It's not like that. If there's enough there, applying more is wasting money. To your point, Cam, we're trying to become efficient. So I would say in the majority of cases, when you're dealing with soils that are not manufactured, like putting greens or sports turf facilities that have sand cap, football fields or something like that, if you're dealing with normal soils, the potassium in your soil is probably going to be sufficient to maintain turf grass at a very acceptable level, particularly on home lawns. I mean, unless, again, we're dealing with millions of people, there's going to be some fraction that does have deficient potassium. I understand that. But unless you're one of those people, applying potassium is usually not going to be beneficial in any measurable sense. So let me just say that. Now, there's cases where when the potassium is low, there can be some benefits from applying it in terms of drought resistance and being able to sustain certain stresses. But again, those are hit and miss. I mean, we'll do 5 studies and find 1 or 2 of them show a response, and 2 or 3 of them don't show a response. So it's not a very consistent element to be applying. So just keep that in mind. I would eliminate. Well, I live in Kentucky where our potassium levels are so freaking high. I will never have to apply potassium the rest of my life. But
we saw that good old soil y'all working with out there in Kentucky. Great on phosphorus, great on potassium. Y'all just need a little bit of urea. You're good to go.
Yeah, that's
calcium
true.
And calcium and manganese too, like everything else.
Yeah.
Great. So I got sick reading those studies. I was like, man, get out of here. Why is this even in the paper?
Well, some people have fertile soils, I mean, it's just the way it is. But if you have an infertile soil and you have potassium deficiency, then applying potassium may be beneficial. But like I said, it's very, very rare. But if you are in one of those rare cases, this graph we're looking right here was done in Davie, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And those soils down there are dealing with potassium levels in the 20s to 30s. They're quite low down there. They can be low. And so they're ideal for doing studies like this. And in this case, in my opinion, the most stunningly successful and brilliant soil scientist I've ever known is George Snyder. He's when he talks, you shut up and just listen. I mean, he's one of these people, just good. I mean, he's so smart. He's retired now for many, many years, but he and Dr. Cesar did this study down there. And basically the nuts and bolts of it are this. If you have a potassium deficiency, you don't need to throw tons and tons of potassium at it. All you need to do is take the urea that we're applying from the previous conversation we've already had, where we're talking about just applying urea or just applying ammonium sulfate and just applying the N is really what you need. Just take that and divide that value, the rate, let's say 1 pound. Let's say you're applying 1 pound N. Just take that and divide it by half. So now you would apply a half a pound of K with that 1 pound of N. And what this graph shows is that if you keep applying more and more potassium, you're not going to get any further benefit from just a simple 2-to-1 N to K. So it'd be like a 20-0 or something, or a 30-15-0 or something like that. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, a 20-0-10 or a 30-0-15. Sorry, I misspoke with the phosphorus.
Yeah.
So it would be that. Now, in some cases, one could argue that I don't just want the turf quality to increase, which is what this graph is.
Mm-hmm.
I also want the potassium in the leaf tissue to go up as well, which I think that's a good argument only in very limited situations. If that's the case, which again, somebody could make that argument in New Jersey, but if that is the case, then a 1-to-1 in decay ratio would be your maximum. If you for some reason had to maximize the percent potassium in the leaf tissue, a 1-to-1 would do that, and further applications or further amounts of potassium would not be necessary. So what I tell people is, don't apply any potassium. If you find out that you actually do need some, then just apply a little bit in with your normal nitrogen applications. Just apply. Let's say, Cam, what kind of grass do you have? Is that your grass behind you, Cam? Is that fescue or bluegrass? What is that behind you? On the
a
screenshot
mix of the two.
That's trash grass.
So, so you have fescue and bluegrass, whatever it is, and you're going to go out in probably September, October, and apply whatever. Let's just assume you're applying just nitrogen, and you go, hey man, this doesn't look too good. I've been doing some investigations, come to find out my potassium's low. Don't go apply 1 pound of N and 2 pounds of K. You're wasting money if you do that. Just apply 1 pound of N, and either with that or just secondary to that, apply 0.5 pound of K. This graph shows that that's all you need to do to maximize your response to the potassium.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Shameless plug again. I think it was one of my latest, I think it was the last episode I did during the series, or maybe the second to last, where I was talking about, coming up with like when to fertilize and how to fertilize. And I wish I would have clipped it now. I forgot. There was so much information, so much good information in that stuff that you sent over, but you were, it was focused to the uptakes of potassium and phosphorus and where to use. And in that video, I said, hey, you 70-30 for the phosphorus, apply most of it in the fall for a cool season. During the growing season, for warm season, you want it during the summertime. And then potassium, let's just split up evenly and put it throughout your season. And whenever it feels really good to have confirmation to the research you've done, and then sit with one of the few soil scientists out there, this is what you do, and have you confirm those approaches that and I can't even take full credit for it. We as the Workin team spitball this stuff all the time in the chat. And then I reach out to professionals like Ray Ito and Ryan DeMay and Matt Martin, people that extend their time to us just like you are, and then help us come up with some digestible information for the community. So it's just good to hear that.
I missed that, Robert. You said you've already said to do that or something? I missed what.
Yeah. You said. This was, I've been running this series, and really all of the information that I've been reading, although I did extensive amounts of research on my own, I didn't see these particular things that you sent me, other than the one long-term study that you had with the soil testing and stuff like that, which is very little I took away and put in my series. But I just done, compare and contrast across different extensions and studies that I've seen, and I came up with this stuff along, spitballing and talking with the fellas like I mentioned, and to see this deep dive information that you guys have spent your livelihood and effort in crafting, and me not diluting something to the point where it's no longer valuable or usable, but I diluted it to a point where it's actually actionable and people can go out on their lawn and save money. It just feels good. I do have a question for you. The potassium source used here, was it muriate of potash? Was it sulfate of potash? Do those things matter? Do you remember? If you don't remember, that's fine. But I'm just curious. Oh, okay. I don't remember what the source was.
I don't remember.
Or if that would have any indication on the responses that you saw here.
And Doc, while you're looking for that, I'll just kind of talk for a second here. One of the things that actually in our class, right before we get ready to take our test in Maryland, is they kind of go through like some general ratio type of NPK
Mm,
recommendations to go down
mm,
with, and that 2-to-1 is actually one of them. NK 2-to-1 NK is one
okay.
of the things that they kind of cover here in Maryland, and again, there's a lot more restrictions here when it comes to fertility applications than most states, and it's good to be able to have the data and the research that you've done
Good.
behind that actually supports that. And then,
Yeah.
of course, that comes also through the University of Maryland Extension. So they
Good.
pass that down, which I know you are a
Okay.
big supporter of the extension.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So I'm glad to see this is confirming what you already believe. That's good, or it's validation, I should say. Answer to your question, Robert, is they use KCl, which is, again, I wouldn't doubt that because it came from George Snyder, who I have there's no one I admire more than George Snyder in terms of his knowledge in soil science. So if you used potassium sulfate, I couldn't say for sure that response was from potassium or from sulfate,
Or
but
from
because he used
sulfur.
KCl,
Right.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the chlorine in that is not going to show any response, but the
Yep.
sulfate could,
Yep.
especially in Fort Lauderdale where the sulfur is low.
Right.
So KCl, and it does matter. You're right, Rob. It does matter. KCl is the least expensive source, much less expensive, but it has a higher salt index. It has a higher chance to burn, which is generally not a huge issue as long as you are able to manage the water and in these things.
Mhm.
But if you're with homeowners who don't help you, they don't water, they don't follow your instructions after you fertilize, you're running the risk of causing some burn with KCl, at least a higher risk than with potassium sulfate. So there is a difference, but potassium sulfate has the additional component of sulfur, which for my entire career, I've never once thought sulfur would be a sulfate. Sulfur is different, but sulfate would be something I'd need to consider. I mean, the
Yeah.
80s and 90s, the sulfur deposits throughout the rainfall was tremendous in the United States. So we just didn't. We got all we needed. But now we're starting to. Oh, here we go. So now we're starting to
Yep.
see a
Yep.
lot of sulfur
Nice
deficiencies.
segue.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I didn't
I
realize it.
like that. Yeah, you
So
queued me up
we're
for it.
starting to see more and more sulfur deficiencies. So potassium sources like potassium sulfate may be giving you a response that you may misinterpret as coming from the potassium. Keep in mind, I have never seen a response to potassium, even though you just showed a graph where you can see a response. It can happen under specific cases. It can happen. But it's extremely, extremely rare to see a beneficial response to applying potassium. Very, very rare. But what is not as rare, apparently now, is the response to sulfate, I should say. It is becoming more common, and that's what we're seeing here. When you apply urea and you don't see a response, I said this to, I guess, Ray's in the chat. I said this to Ray a couple weeks ago.
He just
You
dropped
applying
it.
urea.
Yep.
Ray
Yeah,
been
you're
here.
applying urea.
He been here
Yeah.
for a long
He's still there.
time. Yeah.
I've known about sulfur needs for yeah. So you're applying urea and you don't see a response. Please don't apply more. You don't go put more icing on the cake because you wanted more. Don't do that. Okay. It's not a nitrogen deficiency problem. It's a sulfur deficiency problem, or sulfate. I'm sorry, I keep saying sulfur. Sulfate deficiency problem, and that is a key indicator. You apply urea, you don't see a response. Throw out some potassium sulfate, and I bet you see a green square show up. Or magnesium sulfate or calcium sulfate or anything like that. And the likelihood is good that you will see a response to that. But don't be fooled that it's coming from the calcium, from the potassium, from the magnesium, from the manganese. Don't be fooled. It may be coming from that, but there's an equal chance, maybe even a greater chance, that it's coming from the sulfate, the counter ion in that molecule. So we're seeing more and more of that, guys, and I'm glad you put that up there because I'm probably end up going to do a seminar on the importance of sulfate because, just real briefly, nitrogen metabolism cannot occur in the absence of sulfate. So I equate it to similar to like a car. In order for that engine to start, you need three things. You need a fuel source, you need an ignition source, and you need oxygen. If you got those three things, you're pretty good chance that engine's going to turn over. At least you got a fire. So if you have a fuel source, you have a an ignition, a lighter or a spark, and you have oxygen, it's gonna ignite. But if you limit any of those, you can try. The old adage, will liquid gasoline burn? And people say yes. No, if you put gasoline down at the low temperature where it no longer fumes and it's just liquid, it will not burn. It's like water, because there's no ignition source. I mean, it won't combust. So it's the same thing with
very true
your engine. Yeah, with the engine,
Rocket
if you cut off the I'm talking to the expert right here on explosion. Right. So if you cut off the oxygen of your engine, it's not gonna burn. So and it's the same thing here. If you cut off the sulfur, the nitrogen is not going to metabolize, because I think there's two. Somebody can correct me. There's two proteins: it's cysteine and I'm not a sulfur expert. Cysteine and something else, methionine, or I can't remember. Cysteine and something that are required. They're required to uptake nitrogen, and if they don't exist, you can throw all the nitrogen out there you want, and it's just not going to take it up. So I'm probably going to end up doing more work with sulfur and maybe trying to make that a little bit more, communicate that a little bit better to people, because it's going to become more common.
I like that, because that was the segue that I wanted to go into earlier, and I'm glad that we covered that.
Yeah,
because I mean, there's a lot of, I've seen it a lot where there's the chase for greener, there's chase for more green, deeper green, and the answer is throw more in, and put more in down, or iron, and a lot of times that's not the answer. Like if you're already going down with ammonium sulfate or urea, especially urea, and you're not getting a response, and you go down with an ammonium sulfate, and maybe you get a little bit more of a response out of that ammonium sulfate, that's another reason that's pointing you into a direction that you may be looking at more of a sulfur deficiency than you are looking at your end source that you're using.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that exact thing happened to me this season, and Cam was the one who reminded me to take a look at the soil tests. And I was lacking color. I couldn't figure it out. I was on the road so much last year thanks to Putin, but I came back and the color wasn't. I mean, it was good, but we're trying to be better than good. We're trying to be expert over here. And then I had a inclination that for some reason I got some potassium sulfate in, and I couldn't remember what led up to it. Cam, maybe you do, but you was like, yeah, you should probably, with the amount of sulfur, because I read the back, he was like, that's a lot of sulfur, and he was like, I think that's going to correct your problem. And it all aligns with, me being in one of the greener countries. We don't have as much coming down freely from the air as you would expect. And when I went back to my soil test and I looked, I was like, yeah, that sulfur was not that great. And then I saw a pop that you couldn't believe. And I was like, okay, all right.
Well, there you go.
We see it. We know what it is now. And then we're good to go. So it went from a 9 to a 10.
There you go.
Now, looking at this, Doc, this is wrapping back around to the winterizer, right? Because we kind of addressed the summer stress and all of that, and how to best use it. You don't need to nutrient overload people. That's the so what of that. If you're short in it, spread it evenly, get it in there. But dumping a whole bunch of salt, essentially, as Ray so eloquently put it, it's probably not that, I'm not a soil scientist, but I'm thinking salt, heat, and a whole bunch of water is probably not the best thing for the lawn rolling into the summer. I'm just going to take a wild stab at it as being a pragmatic. But now we have, what is this? What are we looking at, Doc?
Well, Dr. Soldot's doing some great work with potassium, and for years we're like, well, apply potassium, it's cheap and it's not going to hurt anything, right? That was what the mentality was, or at least many cases. And so now Dr. Soldot's been doing work up there for the last 10, 15 years on potassium, and what they're finding is that the application of potassium is increasing the risk of microdochium disease on his bentgrass. Now, this is bentgrass greens.
Yeah.
So, and the guys at Rutgers are doing some work and showing the low potassium is causing some anthracnose risk on poa greens. So with potassium, it seems to be grass specific, and it seems to be a Goldilocks zone, somewhere between 40 and 50 parts per million Mehlich 3 is probably where you want to be to reduce your risk on both ends. And this is some of Micah's work where he showed the same thing. This is back, 15 years ago when he was doing some work there. And he was showing there was increased risk of disease or increased prevalence of disease as the potassium application rate goes up. So there is, I don't know the connection. I do know there's some indications that there's some hormonal increases, like putrescine, which are hormones related to decay and rot, that increase when you increase potassium and decrease as you decrease potassium. So I don't know exactly. I'm not a plant pathologist, or I'm sorry, plant physiologist, but there's something there that we have yet to unpack. Related to potassium. And so right now, this is a perfect example of why I'm telling people to stop applying potassium unless your turfgrass is not responding or not growing well as a result of a potassium deficiency, which almost never happens, which means so you should almost never apply potassium is what this is basically saying. Now, I'm saying all that to say this. There is evidence and blah, blah, blah in the fall, and I get all that, where there's every now and then there's a case where there's a potassium benefit. I get that. But keep in mind, I'll say this real briefly. I have a good friend. It's hearsay. I don't know if it's true, but I have a good friend who I have a lot of confidence in who was in a business meeting in the 80s with a major lawn care company who was trying to come up with another application before they closed the season down. But they knew they couldn't apply nitrogen because no one would apply it in October, November, December, or November, December. Mm-hmm. And so they said, why don't we just put in potassium because it's not going to make the grass grow or anything, and we'll just call it a winterizer. That's how that came up. Mm. It was never any. There was never any science behind it. There wasn't like a scientist at a university saying, well, this is what we found, and so we should start recommending. It came from an industry meeting, from my understanding, where they were just trying to sell another round of fertilizer that didn't have nitrogen in it. That's all it came from. So. Whether that's true or not, I tend to believe it because the source it came from is pretty reliable. But I'll say I don't know for sure, but I tend to believe that. And from that, we've gone down this whole mess of roads, and every now and then you'll find a little bit of truth to it. Well, there's a little bit of benefit here, a little bit of benefit there, but for the most part. Mm-hmm. Most soils are going to have adequate potassium, and applying more isn't going to help. And in fact, Dr. Soldot's finding that applying more in some cases can actually harm your turf.
Mm-hmm. And thanks, Ray. Okay. That statement that I made towards, I'm not a scientist, but, salt, heat stress, water, I was referring to cool season grass. He said it, it reacts differently with warm season grass. Yeah. But nevertheless, the data still supports how to properly manage that. Don't waste your money. No need to nutrient overload. And that's it. That's brought us full circle. Unless anyone wants to revisit something in the chat, you have a question you want us to retap real quick. I'll give it to Cam and let him speak. If you got anything for Dr. Shaddox.
I guess first off, I want to say thank you. Appreciate you for definitely joining us. This has been enlightening, and one of the things that I like to say, I am a data-driven decision person. Like, so when it comes down to my professional career and then also bringing that over into lawn care, that's just the way that I think. So being able to have the data and the research behind it is always good to have. But then you can also bring in behind that, what does it look like? Like, what is the logic behind it? What are the goals that you're actually trying to achieve? So I definitely appreciate you for joining us. Thanks for bringing in this information. And I think it's been real enlightening also to the community. So thank you for the research you're doing. Hopefully we can help you increase this platform that you're looking to expand on, maybe some other research. We're always down to help you support that. So if there's anything that we can do from the Workin team as far as supporting that endeavor, you can always reach out to us and reach back.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for letting me have a platform to kind of communicate this and try to get in front of some potential pitfalls that people can fall into without knowing it. And those things, we covered a lot of them tonight. So you're going to cut them up, and I think that's a good idea to kind of piece this thing apart, and people can kind of go look at areas that they need some help understanding more of, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on tonight. But before I go, Robert, whenever you're comfortable, and if you're not comfortable, that's totally fine. I get it. I'm buying you literally the biggest piece of meat or biggest piece of whatever dinner you like on me, because this is a man. Okay, guys. And he's an EOD. He's about to retire from the military in 2 or 3 years. He's got 2 little babies at home. He's burning the candle at both ends. He's on me clowning around with talk turf with it. He's probably, what is it, 2 o'clock in the morning there or whatever? And you got a baby in the other room.
Getting close to it.
But you know what? I love this. I truly do. I mean, it saved my life in some regard, and I have an immense amount of respect for you and people like you that spend your life taking all of this information and extending it to us, the professionals, the enthusiasts, and the hobbyists, to where we can save coins. I'm about saving those coins. It's tax time coming up, so it don't mean I need to allocate too much money to the lawn. And just making us smarter all. And I think a lot of people forget that this is a profession. And then, the oversimplification of things is not necessarily respectful to the group of people who dedicate their life to this.
Yeah.
Especially when it's not backed by any data. That's where you kind of lose me. So I'll take you up on that dinner someday. I'll be back. It's now.
Cam, you're invited. I didn't mean to leave you out. I don't know your background.
Yeah. And we got the most important question. Aldo, I see you. He says, does Dr. Shaddox prefer corn or flour tortillas? He's got to know.
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never been asked that before.
Yeah, well, you knew Aldo. You know.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a very health conscious person, so it's flour. Yeah. I wish I had.
I think Aldo would say if it's done right, that corn ain't necessarily healthier either. So it depends for me. It depends what kind of taco I'm in the mood for. It just
okay. Well, tacos. Yeah,
but it's hard
corn,
to find. To be fair, it's hard to find corn tortillas, the ones that he's referring to, for sure, fresh and done right. We're not talking about the hardened shell that you buy off the shelf at the grocery store. I know he's not talking about that. He's talking about your good corn tortilla made fresh. You go and you get a bag of it for like 50 cents because that's how they do, and no one speaks English in there. That's what Aldo's talking about.
Maybe I should try that. Maybe I'll change my palate. Maybe.
Yeah, you definitely get that one. And he said, "I'll allow it." Well, definitely. Thank you for your very humbling words, Doc. We do it because we love it, just like you. Thank you for spending the time with us this evening. And for parting words, I hope this was helpful for you guys. Yes, I will break this video down into segments to make it even more digestible for you and just easier watching. Didn't see any questions pop up in the chat. So with that being said, we're going to get up out of here. Y'all have a nice evening.